We'll get started momentarily.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Casey Hutchison. I'm with Gilead Sciences. On behalf of Gilead Sciences, welcome to Connect 17. Looks to be a fantastic conference. I want to welcome Speaker Pro Tem Kevin Mullen, Assemblymember Mark Berman, Supervisor Warren Slocum, and Samsida President and CEO Roseanne Faust. I want to tell you a little bit about Gilead. Since the theme of the conference is disruption, we like to pride ourselves on disrupting, at least in the healthcare space. We are 30 years and celebrating our 30-year anniversary this year. Gilead, I think a great way to explain Gilead is you had 30 pills about 20 years ago for HIV. You now have a single pill. Just 4 years ago, there wasn't a cure for HCV. Now there's a cure, 1 pill, 8 weeks. That's disruptive to the system. And it's what we want to do for our patients. So we're always working constantly to meet unmet medical need. Another area that we're working on is Ebola. So again, from the public health side, what would it happen if we could get a cure for Ebola? So I just wanted to explain who we are. We're also a big partner here in the community. We work closely with our assemblymen and the local councils. Gilead has invested about $3 billion. You're sitting here in our new conference facility in the state over the past 5 years. So again, being part of the community, being an economic driver, and being a disruptor is who we are. So thank you. I hope you have a wonderful conference and a great day.
Good morning, everybody. All right, just a little insider story. Everybody knows Marcy Dragan, my legislative aide, right? Everybody knows her. So Casey was her mentor at one point in life. So Casey, thank you for that. She says it's the other way around. I don't know. Thanks for having us. Appreciate it. Warren Bennis, a noted leadership expert, said, quote, "The factory of the future will have only 2 employees, a man and a dog. The man will be there to feed the dog. The dog will be there to keep the man from touching any of the equipment." In that case, the dog is the disruptive technology. And you could say that the dog is what this year's Connect 17 event is focused on. Disruptive technologies that impact our communities. And as some of you know, we've enjoyed 4 Connect conferences in the past several years, and each one has been better than the last. And I promise you that this year's event is going to be the best ever. So I want everybody, when the speakers come up, to sit up straight and behave, because we're going to live stream this on Facebook. Hopefully that'll work. Thank you, Krista, for doing that. We appreciate it. But before we go any further, let me offer some thank yous to folks, and thank you to Casey for hosting us today, and a sincere thanks to Gilead for generously hosting us on their campus. I don't know about you, but when I drove through, I was a little lost. I was amazed at the development here in Foster City and how fast this corporation is growing. We're honored to be here, obviously. Our host today is one of the preeminent biopharmaceutical companies in the world, an innovator and leader, and relatively new to this space with just 30 years in business of improving lives. Gilead develops medicines, as you heard, for areas of unmet medical needs such as HIV/AIDS drugs, and it is, as she said earlier, a disruptive biopharma company. Thank you to Assemblyman Mark Berman. Mark, thank you for coming, who represents the 24th District, which includes a portion of the peninsula and much of Silicon Valley. And also Samsida's CEO, Roseanne Faust, whose mission is to promote business issues that enhance and sustain the economic prosperity of our region and its local communities. We appreciate your collaboration in making this conference possible. Plus, you're really good people and fun to work with. Wouldn't you agree, Kevin? Yeah, thank you both. I also want to personally thank my senior legislative aide, Marcy Dragan, who does such a wonderful, great, fantastic job at organizing our District 4 events, and this conference is no exception. She's a tireless worker and organized beyond belief. That's why I'm always on time to events, because of Marcy. So thank you, Marcy Dragan. Go ahead, give it up. Thank you for joining us at Connect 17. While we do this as a labor of love, and because we find the changing technology landscape so interesting and have for so many years, but it just wouldn't be the same without an engaged, inspired, and knowledgeable audience like you. I'm proud to serve in this county, San Mateo County, where the leadership in local government is interested in the topics that we cover in these Connect conferences. Kevin, Mark, and I find our roles as legislators are being challenged as we think about what government should or should not do to foster disruptive technologies and how to prepare infrastructure, regulations, and laws for innovations like driverless cars. As we kick off Connect 17, you'll be introduced to people who are changing the way we have approached some of the most fundamental aspects of our lives. Giving over personal data to doctors and schools and how that data is used, voting, hacking, and the integrity of our democracy, autonomous cars, and well, just about everything. Let me share with you a brief introduction about disruptive technologies that might be helpful for some. Disruptive refers to an innovation that creates a new market and value network and eventually disrupts an existing market and value network, displacing established market-leading firms, products, and alliances. But not all innovations are disruptive, even if they are revolutionary. For instance, the first automobile in the late 19th century, the first automobiles in the late 19th century were not a disruptive technology, because early automobiles were expensive luxury items that did not disrupt the market for horse-drawn carriages. The market for transportation essentially remained intact until the debut of the lower-priced Ford Model T in 1908. The mass-produced automobile was a disruptive innovation because it changed the transportation market, whereas the first 30 years of automobiles did not. So here are some examples of some disruptions that are taking place now and will affect certainly our lives, and I'd invite you to think about these and the implications of each one of them. I've taken the liberty also of adding a few comments about each one of these disruptions. So think about this. Robots become coworkers. Robots become coworkers. Obviously, this has significant consequences for our workplaces, for places like this. And I suppose on the lighter side, the funny part about that is that there'll be no more arguments about the temperature being too hot or too cold in our offices, because frankly, robots don't give a damn. Next, wearables like Fitbit to implantables. So wearables to implantables. We will have an opportunity to become somewhat of a human cyborg. As an example, every day, about 3 million Americans have to take a syringe, prick their skin with a needle, and then inject themselves with insulin. Imagine if every one of those diabetes sufferers had a device fitted inside their body that measured their sugar levels and automatically released insulin as and when required. Pretty amazing, wouldn't you say? Also saw last night on I think it was Charlie Rose, there was a little advertisement on the side there where there are actually pills now that have a little sensor in them, and when you swallow the pill, it transmits to the doctor's office to say, oh, Kevin took his pill. Pretty amazing, isn't it? Next, bots. Everybody knows what a bot is, right? Bots usurp apps and websites. This is how we're all going to communicate in the future, through bots. We're all going to have our individual bots. And some people would say to you that we're all tired of all these apps on our phones and all the updating that occurs and all that sort of thing. And imagine a future where you have one icon on your phone and it's your bot and it will do several things for you, from ordering food to ordering up music, etc. So bots will replace websites and apps at some point. Think about genetically modified life forms. This is the stuff that was previously the sole purview of science fiction novels and movies, and it causes me to think about the bar scene in Star Wars where we meet that notorious figure Jabba the Hutt, one of the galaxy's most powerful gangsters. But genetically modified life forms, you've all seen this on the news, it's not necessarily new. Artificial intelligence replaces white-collar expertise. The world of work definitely changes when the computer in the back room is running our offices. That's a possibility. And finally, the last one that I'll mention is that robots who teach themselves. The question is, what will they teach? Could they be teaching for evil purposes? Something to think about. Well, friends, I'm glad to see all of you here. It's always rewarding to come to Connect 17 after months of planning and preparation and corralling speakers. As I say, I'm excited to get this day started. I appreciate everyone being here. I'd like to turn it over, excuse me, to my good friend and longtime colleague who together we dreamed about years and years ago, 20 years ago, having these Connect conferences, and here we are, we finally did it. Kevin Mullen. Thank you, Kevin.
Thank you very much, Supervisor. And it was Warren's vision many years ago that has resulted in this conference. So thank you, sir, for your leadership. I'm a little freaked out after Warren's comments about what the future may or may not hold for us. Excited and a little bit freaked out, I guess. But honored to be with all of you. Pleased to be hosting yet another Connect conference. And I would like to add my thanks to Casey Hutchinson and the staff here at Gilead for hosting us. A welcome to my colleague, Assemblymember Mark Berman. He did not get the memo that we don't wear ties at Connect 17, but he looks sharp, so he wins the day. He is joining us as a host and sponsor along with our longtime co-host, Roseanne Faust. So thank you to the leadership team here. And I want to take a moment to thank my staff who are sprinkled throughout the room, in particular Mario Rendon, who is my district director, who was very active in the planning. So thank you, Mario, and my staff for all that you do. So as I prepared my remarks, or Mario helped me prepare my remarks, I took a look back at the past year and reflected on what has happened in the world of technology. This year, Apple celebrated the 10th anniversary of the iPhone, a device that has revolutionized how we live, work, and play. So a quick show of hands. I own a smartphone. Yes, most everybody here. I check my phone within the first 5 minutes after I wake up. You can admit it. It's okay, everybody. We're here together to support one another. I check my phone at least 5 minutes before I go to sleep, which is really ill-advised as I understand it, if you actually want to sleep. And you may not want to answer. I only put my phone down when I fall asleep. In my case, it like falls out of bed. So it should come as no surprise that the average American adult, 18 years or older, spends 2 hours and 51 minutes on their smartphone every day. Millennials, those aged 18 to 32, check their phone on average 150 times a day. Psychologists and neurobiologists are researching how text messages, social media posts, and emails all contribute to the release of dopamine in the human brain. It's that same neurotransmitter that rewards you for accomplishing a goal. Every time we receive a notification on our smartphone, it's that Pavlovian cue that a reward is on its way. We are prompted by the apps we download on our device to provide information, and that information is then used to send notifications when certain conditions are met. We enable notification and GPS tracking without really thinking about it, and all of this information, on top of what we consciously provide, is collected and cataloged. Your mobile phone is a window into your life. On your phone, we can discover your family, friends, and coworkers with all their personal information, your personal correspondence, your daily schedule, your travel, your taste in food, music, and film, your health status, your shopping habits, your banking and other financial information, and the lists go on. And your mobile phone is also a window to the world. Those instant notifications bring us the latest news, both important and trivial. We can witness historic events or participate in a conference like today. We can mobilize and engage instantaneously. And in our hand is a tool to access more information than is contained in many libraries. A decade into this new era, I'd like to think our phones have made the world a little smaller and our lives a little bit easier. Yet we still have to contemplate what happens with all the information that is collected about us and how to keep it safe. Thus, part of our morning will discuss those very concerns. As in years past, our ask of you remains the same. How do we harness technology in all of its variations and with all of its benefits and challenges to better serve those we represent? I hope today's program will provide some guidance. Just a few housekeeping items. Our Connect Talks this morning will be live streamed using Facebook Live from Supervisor Slocum's page and my official Facebook page, as opposed to the unofficial Facebook page, which you don't want to look at. Please make sure to share on your organization's Facebook page as well. In addition, I'm pleased to announce that thanks to Penn TV, today's conference is being recorded and videos will be available at our website for the conference, www. Do people say that anymore? www. Okay, just connectsmc.org. And make sure you have downloaded the Connect app so you can follow along and engage with others. On a final note, for those of you using social media, we encourage you to use hashtag ConnectSMC on Twitter and Facebook, and make sure that you follow us. And again, a final thank you to Casey and Gilead. I am the chairman of the Select Committee on Biotechnology, and we are so very proud to have Gilead here in the 22nd Assembly District. And with that, I turn it over to my colleague and legislative partner, somebody I am so proud to call a friend and legislative partner here on the peninsula, and a new partner on Connect, the Connect project, and that is Assemblymember Mark Berman.
Well, thank you so much, Kevin. I'm glad to join you and Warren and Roseanne this morning, as well as all of you. How many of you are attending your first Connect Talk, your first Connect 17? That's great, about maybe a third of the crowd, a half of the crowd. Well, Connect Talks have been a constant since the first conference 5 years ago. This is my first Connect Talk as well, so we're going to be learning. I'm going to be learning along with you, and the first thing I learned this morning is that I don't need to wear a tie. So thanks for the heads up on that again, Kevin, Warren, you're great. Connect Talks provide a snapshot of new technologies and ideas modeled after TED Talks. For those of you not familiar with the concept, TED is a nonprofit organization devoted to ideas worth spreading. It started in 1984 as a conference bringing together people from the worlds of technology, entertainment, and design, thus TED. Since then, its scope has become ever broader, and you can learn more about it at TED.com. Now here's the key. TED conferences bring together the world's most fascinating thinkers and doers who are challenged to give the talk of their lives in 18 minutes or less. However, since our presenters are twice as impressive as the folks who give TED Talks, we're giving them half the time. So they have 9 minutes to present the talk of their lives. We have 3 Connect talks interspersed between the panels. You're going to learn about some fascinating things that are happening at the intersection of technology, cybersecurity, elections, and mobility. And because our agenda is so tight, we're going to dispense with formal introductions and speaker bios. This is the point where I normally say you can read the bios in your program, but as you can all see, we've gone paperless and you don't have programs. So instead, you can read all of the bios on the Connect app. And if you're having trouble downloading the app, there are folks at the front desk who can help you go through that process. That said, our first Connect Talk presenter, Chris Finan, is a good friend of mine, and I'm grateful that he's taking time out of his busy day running a startup to come impart some wisdom. Let me ask, who likes to start their day before 9 a.m. talking about cybersecurity? Anybody? Any going once? Going? I saw 3 hands. Well, you're in luck, because that's what Chris is going to be talking about. Chris will share his expertise in developing cybersecurity policy in the Obama administration and what we in the public sector should be doing to secure our most sensitive information. So with that, please join me in welcoming Chris Finan.
Thank you, Assemblymen. Thank you, Supervisor. Thanks. So actually, because of the topic you told me about, I prepared an interpretive dance. Hope that's okay. I figured that'd go a little bit better this morning. So I served about 14 years in federal service and recently came out to California. And it was really great to leave that time behind and just be a citizen again. And it's always really energizing for me to come to events like this that are extremely well put together. You've got, local leadership that's putting a lot of time and thought, great staffing into these topics. Because when I think about government, after reflecting on that time, I think about what Barney Frank used to say, that government is really just what we choose to do together. And so today I'll just talk to you a little bit about things that as a community I think we need to be worried about. And it's really not a cybersecurity talk, because ultimately, and I'm a tech entrepreneur, this is my 3rd company, and I will tell you, I'm the first to admit that things don't change because of technology. Things change when people are enabled by technology. And they change the way that institutions work, they change processes, they break down barriers. And so, when I think about this problem that we have, and I do very much believe that the undermining of the integrity of our institutions is an existential threat to our democracy. It's not going to be some tech magic bullet that solves it. It's going to be all of us working together. Because at the end of the day, this is about trust. And that's what I want to talk to you about today. Trust, again, are the things that we choose not only to do together, but to believe together. Now, trust often can be found in data, but as we've seen recently, data can be interpreted many different ways. And often, it's the loudest voices who carry the day, not the most correct ones. So some of what I'll talk to you about is what happens when that data, whether it's through interpretation or whether it's through manipulation, is actually undermined. What does that do to our institutions? But I just wanted to highlight this article that I found, and particularly the date. This really shouldn't be a surprise to us. Look at what's happened in the last year, what's happened to our democracy. We should have seen this coming, and yet we didn't. I think some of that was a failure of our elected leadership, but really it was more a failure, I think, of all of us to not take this risk seriously and understand how fragile our institutions and indeed the rule of law is. And at least for me, the last year has really driven that home. That trust is what undergirds the rule of law more than any document. But I will posit here, I'll give you the bottom line up front, that data manipulation, the idea that a hacker could come in and actually change zeros to ones, say in an email trove or even on a Twitter account, Does everyone remember what happened 2 weeks ago? Twitter contractor breaks in to the president's personal email account, which he's now using as his official email account, and shuts it down. That same access could have sent out a new tweet. Could have sent out a tweet that said, hey, I just fired a nuclear missile at the Korean Peninsula. What would have happened in response? What would have happened to the markets? So the idea that you can actively undermine the data, I posit, is much more pernicious than what we've known as cybersecurity, or we traditionally thought of cybersecurity risks in the past, which is a hacker's going to go in and they're going to steal my credit card information. They're going to steal my account credentials. I actually believe now those risks are really secondary to what a hacker could do, likely a state-sponsored one, could do by going in and changing a database so that we're now interpreting results that are much different than they should be. But I want to give you a couple examples of what this really means, and maybe I'll tell a story or two. So the first one is NASDAQ. NASDAQ, and there's been a more recent breach, unfortunately, but back in 2011, I was working in the White House for President Obama on cybersecurity policy. And there was a breach of the NASDAQ. And there was a time of about 2 or 3 days when no one really knew how bad it was. And there was a concern that the data in the NASDAQ transaction systems may have been, again, manipulated. When you think about that systemic risk, now all of a sudden no one knows what the real value of the market is. What could that do? It's the risk of undermining the system as a whole, of people losing confidence in that trading platform, and indeed potentially in the entire economy. So when people used to ask me, hey, what keeps folks in the West Wing up at night? It was this kind of cybersecurity risk. It was so bad that we were actually running the response out of the Situation Room, which is pretty unheard of. It was really taken seriously by the very highest levels of government. It turned out to be not as bad as we thought it could be, but again, the risk is there, and it's a very real one. So on your left, that's the Indian Nuclear Command and Control Center, and on the right is the Pakistani one, a few hundred miles away. You'll notice big screens, shows you whether there are missiles inbound. How hard do you think it is for a hacker, if they get into that network, to put something up on that screen and make the other side think that there's something being launched? So that's the type of manipulation that we're talking about. Likewise, the Pentagon has this problem. So you may not know this, but anytime we go to war, and we're doing that a lot, it seems, recently, 90% of all our military troops, our supplies, I myself flew to war on a civilian airliner. 90% of all our military troops and supplies are transported by the civilian sector. And all of that coordination takes place over the internet. So what happens if, like when I got to Iraq, all of my guns and my bullets ended up in Qatar or in South Korea? What happens if you did that at scale? You can really throw a wrench into a nation's ability to mobilize and go to war, to protect things, especially when the stakes are very high. And of course, when I first introduced this slide at a talk almost a year ago, this wasn't really in the news, and people were kind of scratching their heads. Why are you talking about this? I guess it's pretty evident to all of us now. But the idea that you can actually hack an election system, you can hack the voter registration rolls and change things. And you may not need to change the results. You may just need to do enough to undermine people's faith in the results, or even create turmoil for the next 2 years. So the research is pretty convincing that it's easy to do this remotely, at least for specific systems, maybe not writ large, but to go and cherry pick a few key systems. So what does it all mean? I'm a tech guy. There's some tech things that we can do to mitigate the risk, but as I said, it really does take people. It takes, I don't care if you're working at a nonprofit, if you're working at a school, if you're working at the local, state, or federal level of government. It takes everybody to be aware, to have good security practices across the board. And there are some tech things that you can do. But focusing on ensuring the integrity, that is really key. And then assuming that you're never going to keep a hacker out of a system. I will tell you this, I've been in cybersecurity for a long, long time. A determined hacker who's well-resourced will always, always be able to penetrate a system. Even separating that system from the internet. As we've seen with things like the Stuxnet virus, they can even hop those air gaps. And there are new solutions like blockchains, things like that, that can help. But again, there's no panacea. You've got to take a layered approach. Often having backups, having resiliency is very important. Having paper backups is really important. And ultimately, as we think about policy prescriptions, I think the questions that we need to be asking are, how can we incentivize investments in these types of new technologies? How can we deter that type of manipulation at scale by uncovering it, holding those accountable that were either complicit or even actively colluded? And then I'll leave you with this, which I saw on the news just like 2 weeks ago. We just have to make ourselves a harder target. So you might want to change your password, or just start with not putting it on your computer when you're going to do a live NBC broadcast. So thank you all. Thank you all for hosting me, and have a great day.
So I think we're going to do the panel next.
I thought you were here.
Actually, I'll take that. Chris, thank you so much for a thought-provoking presentation. We are going to transition to our panel discussion, Big Data versus the Dark Side. Government has been a storehouse of information that through advancing technology can now be more effectively cataloged, analyzed, and implemented. And government big data troves are attractive to those that would capitalize by its misuse. Over the past year, numerous cyber attacks have paralyzed or caused substantial harm to the private and public sectors. The most recent and far-reaching is, of course, Equifax. Our panel will explore how big data can be safely shared and utilized, and how sensitive information is protected. Joining the conversation, I would welcome them up to the panel, as well as my co-moderator, Warren Slocum. Joining the conversation is Michael McNerney with Technology for Global Security, Victoria Veresing with Palantir, and Rod Ogawa with the Silicon Valley Data Trust. If Michael, Victoria, and Rod could join me on the panel. So Michael?
Yes.
There you go, right there.
Yeah, you bet.
Yeah.
Why'd you sit here? I'll sit here.
They told me to sit here.
Okay. Okay. Where do you want me to sit? Right here. Okay. Very good.
So we'll let them get situated. We are going to start with Michael. Each of our panelists will present, and then what we really want to do is open this up to the audience so we can get a little bit of a dialogue going here with our panelists. So Michael, this is Michael McNerney with Technology for Global Security. Why don't we go ahead and start with you? And I hope your mic is working. If not, I'm just going to go ahead and hand this to you.
That's right, kind of belt and suspenders here. Is this working okay? All right, terrific. We can holster that bad guy. Okay, thanks for inviting me. I love coming here and talking about security. It's one of my favorite things to do. I'm one of those people that thinks about security first thing in the morning, God help me. Thanks as well to Chris Finan. Chris and I actually used to work together in DC back in the day. When he said he was in federal service, he meant he was working for Barack Obama, not that he was in prison. I thought I would make that clear. Chris was basically my counterpart at the White House. I worked for the Secretary of Defense in cybersecurity. I learned a lot from Chris during that time, and I still learn something new from him every time I hear him talk. So thank you for those remarks. What I thought I would do, I think Chris laid out a really great strategic framework for the threats that we're facing. Maybe I'll take that down just one more level and hopefully come up with some more operational and tactical things and practical things that we can think about doing in terms of security. And I think one of the most important things that we do is really kind of come up with a strategy for handling security. When people throw around terms like cybersecurity, and whether it's being applied to big data or to elections, it kind of has this tendency to mean all things to all people, and that can be overwhelming. And so in order to get our hands wrapped around this, I think it's helpful to kind of parse it down into something that's a little bit more manageable. Now I realize I had the benefit of working at a place like the Pentagon, which has a $500 billion budget and 2 million people and some of the greatest cybersecurity specialists in the world. So not all of the lessons that I learned there are going to be applicable to everybody in this room, but I think some of the lessons learned might be, and that's kind of what I want to impart. So in terms of a strategy, I think it's helpful to begin by looking at it in two frameworks. The first is external, and the second is internal. So if you're trying to defend your own network and your own enterprise, it's really important to think about what is the nature of the threat that you're facing externally. What are the trends? Chris did a really good job of saying that we weren't really expecting information to be used against us in the way that it was in this last year. That's a new trend. That's something that we weren't ready for, although I think we should have been. And so staying in front of these trends is really important. A couple years ago, it was really about identity theft. That was like the big thing, and denial of service attacks. And while those still go on, we've seen an evolution in the kinds of threat that we're facing. Now we're seeing a lot of ransomware attacks, and ransomware attacks increasingly targeting middle and small businesses, schools. We're seeing that proliferate dramatically. Again, as Chris mentioned, we're seeing the use of information being used against people in a way that it hadn't been before. So staying ahead of the actual, the bad guys and what their latest techniques are and why they're doing what they're doing is really important. Kind of pay attention to the Willie Sutton rule, if you will. You rob banks because that's where the money is. What are these people after, and why would they be targeting you? And then that brings you to the second part of this, which is the internal analysis. So you need to take a hard look at yourself, both individually and as an organization, and think about what does your security posture look like. And one of the very first places that you should start is with your customers and with your employees. As we are increasingly becoming aware, all of us are kind of on the front lines in a cyber incident, right? Everybody who is an employee of your agency or of your company, every customer that accesses your website is a potential person that a hacker can access and use them to get access to your enterprise. And so making sure that your employees and your customers and yourselves are educated, that you're trained, and that you're resourced to understand the nature of the threat and take basic security measures is very important. Security is oftentimes thought of in terms of kind of 80-20. There are just a couple things you can do that get you 80% of where you need to be, and really getting your people trained and educated, doing basic cyber hygiene is that 80%. These are things that we all know about: strong username and password, implementing multi-factor authentication, which is kind of like, for those who don't know, almost like a third password. That is tremendously important. It's available for almost all of your technology providers: Google, Gmail, Dropbox. All of these services offer multi-factor authentication. Frankly, had we been offering multi-factor and implementing multi-factor authentication in things like OPM, which was hacked, arguably that would have stopped that. So simple things like that are incredibly important. And then the educational element of that as well, making sure that people know that they are in fact potentially being targeted. And that means that they should be very careful about the websites that they visit, very careful about the emails that they open, and the links that they click on. That right there is really, really important. Now, once you have the kind of hygiene portion of this, kind of squared away, and you have a great program for that, then you need to take a really strategic look at your own critical assets. Security is really oftentimes about trade-offs and about balancing. We can't secure everything 100% gold-plated all of the time, right? We don't all have the resources of some place like the Pentagon. Security is expensive, it's resource intensive, it takes expertise. And so, doing a little bit of triage is really important. So analyzing what are your critical assets. This is a conversation about big data. And increasingly we're seeing that data itself is really, really valuable to attackers. They can use that data to, sell it on the black market. They can manipulate that data to undermine you or your agency's mission or your company's mission, or they can use it to embarrass you publicly, like they did with the DNC, right? So perhaps data itself is your core asset that you need to protect. Perhaps it's credit cards information if you're a small business. If you're a small bank, it may be customer accounts. So identifying that, that is really, really important. I will say, because there are a number of politicians in the room, actual communications are really important, right? Basically the gossip that goes on within your organizations, that can be used against you. And has been used against you, and I think that will be a trend that continues. And once you've identified that kind of really critical asset, then you can start to ask yourself, what can we do to protect that? Do we need to keep this around, right? Do we need to, for example, keep emails forever, or should we delete them? Do we need to have all of these systems connected to the internet all the time, or should they be air-gapped? Should everybody in the organization have access to these critical assets, or should only a few trusted people have these accesses? Are we using the right level of encryption? What does our actual security stack look like, and what solutions are we actually buying to protect these assets? And so that lets you have a much more manageable outlook on how to protect what's important without overstretching your security teams. And then finally, which I think is the value of something like this, is really to collaborate, to work with other people, to learn from other organizations. One of the things that we set up when I was at the Pentagon was an information sharing alliance between the Department of Defense and a number of defense industrial-based agencies. That has since morphed into something that's much broader, and now there are many, many different alliances. The healthcare sector has a very robust one. The financial services sector has a very robust one, where oftentimes competitors will come together and share information about a common threat and learn the latest techniques and procedures to protect themselves, learn about the latest trends from attackers, and just generally, kind of raise everybody's security posture. So collaborating, sharing information, learning from each other, and attending conferences like this, I think are the last kind of really important piece to begin thinking about how to secure ourselves more practically. So with that, I'll conclude my opening remarks and turn it back over to Kevin.
Great, thank you, Michael. Give us a lot to think about there, a very broad overview of the many topics that are at hand. So thank you, Michael. Victoria Veerasingh is with Palantir Technologies. Victoria, we'll turn it over to you.
Thank you so much. Hello, everyone. Good morning. So I work at Palantir Technologies. We are a data integration software company. So what does that mean? We essentially integrate disparate sources of data, provide a dashboard for the user at an organization to find patterns and trends in the data that they would not have been able to find before. This morning, I'm going to be talking about how big data is used in the community in two of our community-based projects. One is with Santa Clara County, and the other is with Team Rubicon. And I'd love to start, this conversation with a quick video of our work with Team Rubicon. Team Rubicon is a veterans-guided service disaster relief organization. So they deploy volunteers to regions affected by disaster and basically go into houses, muck out, and help families recover from those disasters. We started partnering with Team Rubicon to help them with the logistics of that, to identify the highest need families and individuals in a given region, and to help distribute volunteers and resources appropriately. I would love to play a quick video, and then we can come back to the discussion.
Palantir Technologies is a software company based in Palo Alto. We've come to help out with Hurricane Sandy, this organization called Team Rubicon, which is a group of veterans that provides disaster relief. The problem that Team Rubicon faces is there's a lot of people here in the Rockaways that need help. They need to identify those people, transfer that information to a centralized location very quickly, and then dispatch teams to go help those people and clean up their houses, essentially. When we first got here, Team Rubicon was recording their data on paper. The first thing we did is we ate all that information. Then we set up a system where residents are just walking up, there's a volunteer standing there with an iPad, putting their information into a web form that automatically creates an object in Palantir that is a request for help object.
We're actually going to be looking for more of this while we're up here.
The other primary way is we've got people with Palantir mobile devices, and they go out, they take photos of the damage itself, and they send that image and that data, and it creates an object in Palantir out of that. With that data, we use it as efficiently as we can, dispatch the work teams out to these sites.
How many work orders did you guys get?
We send computer scientists into the field. We showed up here and Palantir wasn't configured for this setting. We built it on the spot. We built the Webflow in place. We built the ontology in place. We trained all of the volunteers here so that they knew how to use it. And 5 or 6 days later, they're doing disaster relief in a way that nobody ever has before. Palantir was founded with the motto that they were going to go out and solve really hard problems. Helping people in a disaster is one of the world's hardest problems.
So as you saw in the video, that model is a model that we deploy to all of our partnerships, which is creating the product in our headquarters in Palo Alto, but really further developing that product out in the field. You know, we started in 2004. We were living in a post 9/11 world. Our founders recognized the immediate threat of terrorism. And when we first started in the defense and intelligence industries, what we saw was, you know, massive amounts of data that was disparate, that wasn't being connected, and that the result of that were decision makers not being able to make data-driven decisions using an informed data set. And as we started looking around in other industries, we saw the similar problem. Data being disparate, not being connected, and not allowing decision makers to solve the problem that they were seeking to solve. And so as we moved into various industries, it wasn't that we were subject matter experts, but we were experts at the tech, and the problem was the same. And so by deploying the tech and working side by side with our partners, as you see with Team Rubicon, to customize our product and to customize tools that allow them to solve their problem, you know, we empower organizations to do their best work by us being able to do our best work. Team Rubicon, 3 years into the partnership, very proficient user of Palantir. They boast having, you know, many users that are really good at using Palantir even without us. You know, Team Rubicon has been deployed to Houston, locally to San Jose, and every time they're deployed, we're sending engineers out there to ensure that each time we're bettering the platform. You know, we're upgrading the software to make it usable for the users on the ground. You know, it's really the combination between product and humans that allow them to be able to deliver service to the people that they're trying to serve. You know, Team Rubicon is very specialized as a special antidote. You know, a lot of our Palantirians volunteer. I went out 6 months ago to McHenry, Illinois. They had some flooding going on there. Last weekend, we sent some volunteers to go out to Napa, Santa Rosa area. So it's a really special partnership, but is continuing to be developed as we continue to work with their organization. Now, I'd like to switch over to another issue facing our community. You know, on any given night, there are more than 6,000 homeless individuals in Santa Clara County. Of that group, there are about 2,500 that are chronically homeless. In July of 2015, the County of Santa Clara launched Project Welcome Home, which is California's first Pay for Success project. As a quick overview, Pay for Success is a performance-based social services contract. So basically, Project Welcome Home, Pay for Success, identifies a targeted outcome. In this case, it's lowering the amount of homeless individuals in Santa Clara County. through an intervention. That intervention is Abode Services providing stable and secure housing for homeless individuals in the community. And the project is evaluated over time through a third-party independent evaluator, in our case it's UCSF, to measure the success of the project. What do we do for Project Welcome Home? We are the centralized platform that allows users both at the county and Abode to track, serve, and measure the outcomes of chronically homeless individuals in the system. The platform allows users to do three things. One, to deliver targeted service delivery. Second, to deliver publicly scarce government resources. And third, to measure outcomes. The users, both on the county end and Abode Services, are using an integrated platform that takes criminal justice system data, we take health and hospital systems data, we take the county homeless management system, as well as Abode lease management and case management system. We provide a platform that connects all of them so users can interact with the data, identify homeless individuals at their highest risk, and place them into secure housing. Now, the data we're dealing with is really sensitive. This is data that can identify a person. We're dealing with health data. All this data is really sensitive. So how do we ensure that we're protecting the data, so we're protecting individuals that's being used in the system? And so the bulk of our involvement in Project Welcome Home in the first year that we were involved was actually figuring this problem out. So this meant going through assessments, evaluating our product, and engineers literally embedding code into the product that would provide safeguards for this type of data. Palantir, when we were founded in 2004, we created the first privacy and civil liberties team dedicated to just this problem. It's composed of attorneys, to engineers, to philosophy thinkers, and the idea is, we're going to be working with really sensitive data, and we're going to have users across a variety of organizations. We need to make sure that this data is protected and that the users can do three things, right? So the right types of users can access the right types of data. The second is the right types of information are being allowed to be manipulated and to be changed and to be tracked. And the third is how can we have logs that actually monitor what users are doing. So in the event that there's a bad actor, we can go back and look at exactly the steps that they took within the platform to manipulate the data or to change things within the data ecosystem. There's definitely concern of how do we manage all of this with all these users, but by putting into place these guards, working directly with our counterpoints at the county, at Abode Services, we're reaching that target of delivering service while ensuring that we're protecting the privacy and civil liberties of all of the clients that we serve. Thank you.
Excellent, Victoria. Thank you. Exciting application of private sector technology for a public purpose and a public mission. And I think that's resonating with a number of folks in our audience. So thank you very much for that overview. And finally, we'll turn to Rod Ogawa with the Silicon Valley Data Trust. Rod, you are up.
Thank you. Good morning. I have two disclaimers, maybe three. The first is I didn't get to put on ties. And being a faculty member at UC Santa Cruz, this is really foreign territory anyway. The second thing is I did not know what Chris was going to say in his opening talk. But you'll see that the themes that he struck, particularly in his introduction, bear on the work that we're doing here. The Silicon Valley Regional Data Trust aims to change the culture of data use by public schools and agencies in Silicon Valley, and Silicon Valley for the purposes of the SVRDT includes San Mateo County, Santa Clara County, and Santa Cruz County, which is my home base. The mission of SVRDT is to stimulate change in the culture and practice of how data is responsibly and ethically used to develop actionable solutions to critical educational, health, and social problems. I guess the final disclaimer is, bear with me because I may have to refer to my notes, and bear with me with the slides that are chock full of content, because I'm representing a team. And each team member wanted to make sure that their stuff was included. And so I may race through this pretty quickly because of the time limit. but we have a substantial amount of time after the talks for you to ask questions about specifics. We can go back to the slides, so bear with me. The basis for the Silicon Valley Regional Data Trust is to link data between public schools and public health and human service agencies, largely at the county level, to inform the services that children receive, to inform programs, and to inform policymakers who govern those programs and agencies. And in our county, the need is quite great. For example, we're talking about a student population of over 400,000 kids, and that's growing. Almost 40% are on free or reduced lunch, which means they come from low-income families. Academically, a large portion of our kids are performing poorly, and we have a substantial representation of ethnic, racial, and linguistics groups that historically have been dubbed underserved by our agencies and by public education. So there's a great need there. And the idea is that combining data sharing data across public agencies and public schools, we can put children at the center of the service. And so you will see that this SVRDT involves the 3 counties, the county governments in the 3 counties, the public schools in the 3 counties, and currently among the county agencies involved are behavioral and mental health, child welfare services, and juvenile justice and probation, which, as the counties themselves have deemed, are those that are most directly involved in the provision of services to children and their families. And so this is, like I said, bear with me here. Okay, so SVRDT is building a secure information sharing environment that connects 66 school districts to the Data Zone, which is the central educational data repository hosted by the Santa Clara County Office of Education. And it connects all the school districts, potentially will connect all the school districts in San Mateo, Santa Clara, and Santa Cruz counties, to develop the legal documentation for cross-agency data sharing, and to define the SVRDT research agenda. And I should say that this work is being supported by a generous grant from the Chan Zuckerberg Initiative. And I should add that a person who was really critical in that effort to get the funding was Ann Campbell, the San Mateo County Superintendent, who put us in touch with Chan Zuckerberg. Yay, Ann. All right. Yeah, the headings are lost. Okay. One of the things that we learned very early in developing this, in developing SVRDT, is that trust, this goes back to one of the comments that Chris made, that trust lies at the very heart of this. If the agencies don't trust this, if the people served by the agencies don't trust this, if the policymakers of the state and local levels who govern this don't trust this, it's not going to work. And so the first step in developing trust, as is always the case, is face-to-face. And so we spent over 3 years meeting with policy leaders, leaders of public schools, leaders from county agencies, families and communities, as well as university researchers, to identify their commitment to this, the challenges and the opportunities that they could identify in pulling this off. All right. In making this work, though, it was clear that we couldn't stop with the development of face-to-face trust, that we were somehow going to have to institutionalize trust systemically. And institutionalizing trust includes these components: policy, architecture, technology, and change integration. And again, I'm going to have to zoom right through this. So in terms of, these are the 4 elements that will be in place to institutionalize trust across the agencies, between agencies and the policymakers, and between both and the communities they serve and the researchers at UC Santa Cruz who will be doing the data analysis to answer questions of importance to the participating schools and health and human service agencies. And so this is written by our lawyers, so it's a little wordy. The first step in developing the policy and governance system involves interagency information sharing agreements. We have a draft agreement which has been shared with the agencies, and we're in the process of finalizing that. The second piece will be an enterprise memorandum of understanding, which takes the basic elements of the interagency data sharing agreements and operationalizes the specifics as to who will be authorized to get what data from whom for what purposes. And then the final piece is a uniform consent form that will be used by all the participating agencies and the public schools to gain the consent of parents and guardians of the children whose data are being collected and used. In addition to the sort of policy piece, is the development of a secure information sharing environment. So there will be a technical architecture that will be in place that will allow for the sharing of data that's held in the educational data repository, as well as the data that are being warehoused by each of the 9 participating agencies in the 3 counties. And it's there that issues of security and privacy will be dealt with on a technical basis. Yeah, and so as I was saying, trust lies at the very heart of this, and this goes back to something that Chris introduced in his talk. And to do all of that will require continuing face-to-face contacts, policy and governance that secures privacy and security of data, as well as the technical architecture that does so on a technical basis, dealing with many of the issues that were already identified by one of the panelists. Oh, and we're back. And so let me close by saying we have appreciated the support of all of the agency representatives, the representatives of public education, and by policymakers, to the extent that the county boards of supervisors have adopted resolutions, the county boards of education have adopted resolutions supporting this work. Assemblymember Mark Stone from our area authored a joint resolution that was adopted last year by the Assembly and Senate, naming SVRDT as a state pilot for interagency data sharing. And Assemblymember Stone authored and we sponsored a bill, AB 597, that was signed by the governor a month ago, that amends state code, which already allows for interagency data sharing within counties, to now provide for sharing of data across county lines, but allowing only our 3 counties to do so. Again, to serve as a pilot for the rest of the state.
Rod, thank you for your leadership. It is indeed an integrative, innovative approach that we hope other regions will embrace, but yours is leading the way. This region is leading the way, and I appreciated that shout out to our Superintendent Ann Campbell, who has done such an incredible job for us here in San Mateo County. So with that, thank you all on the panel. We do have about 20 minutes for some Q&A and some dialogue if something triggered a thought or a question. Zach Ross from Assemblymember Berman's office is in the back. He is the microphone man right now. So if you raise your hand for questions, Zach will do his Phil Donahue impression and get over to you. Does anybody even remember who Phil Donahue? Did I just age myself? Okay. We have a question right here on the aisle. Ann Schneider.
Hi, Ann Schneider, Councilwoman, City of Millbrae. Palantir, it sounds intriguing. A number of us here serve on the County Emergency Services Council. We've had one data company come in and talk about how they could map hazard zones. But I'm also a CERT member, and I was a Red Cross logistics person. So I love the program. How can we learn more, and are you looking at incorporating all of the local disaster repair programs?
Well, if you head to our website, we have information about our Palantir Rubicon, but I'd be happy to chat with you after and give you a little more details of how we do that. I mean, disaster relief is big. I mean, reflecting on this past year, a number of regions, both in the U.S. and outside, have experienced tremendous impact from disaster relief. And it's something that, I know there are a variety of companies that are looking at this, but, our perspective is approaching it from a data perspective. And the other part of this is the more that you grow your data repository, the better prepared you will be in the future, because you'll have multiple case studies to look into. So, I'm happy to chat about what specifically you're dealing with, what data systems, you're looking at to kind of figure a way to use data in our communities for good, and to stay prepared and stay ahead of the curve.
Other questions? Yes. Microphone coming your way.
Victoria, Tom Gage from Marconi Pacific. Do you have data on transportation? Is that in your system, and what might you have been using it for?
Sure. So just a quick point of clarification. So we actually don't host any data. The data stays with our partner organization. So what we do is we just give our platform. Our platform sits on top of existing data ecosystems. So you could put our platform in, you could take it out. No harm, no done. Our objective is to help you as an organization make better sense of your data. We never host the data. We rely on you to be the stewards of your own data. We stray away from even managing data systems. We like to go into organizations that already have a system of information. In regards to transportation, we don't currently work with organizations that are looking at specific transportation data, but we are involved in a number of initiatives in the community. My colleague Mila Zelka, if she could raise her hand in the back, leads a lot of our transportation initiatives, so she would be a great person to talk to.
Hi, my name is Rob Solano. I'm with the Northern California Regional Intelligence Center, and I just want to give a plug. Victoria, your software is great. There's a storyline that comes with it where you can actually be involved in any type of analytical data. And if someone stopped you and said, what's the progress relative to this product that you're doing, with the way Palantir is set up, you can instantaneously do a presentation with a prepared storyline already for the data that you've already prepared. So that's a plug for Palantir. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks so much. Actually, with Project Welcome Home, we have several different tools. So as you can imagine, the county has one objective, a boat has another objective, but UCSF wants people to measure outcomes. And so we actually have a tool that allows you to look at a macro view. And so you can actually see how many chronically homeless individuals have been in stable housing. And if they're not in stable housing, what services are they using? What services are they going back to? So you can better transition your preventatives, your intervention, to something that's better suited for that individual. So it allows you to go deep into one client, or take a macro look and say, okay, in this part of Santa Clara County, we're experiencing large levels of increase in homelessness. In this county, things are actually working, and why are they working? So with that, and to your point, you can actually pull a report out. So if you're presenting to management, if you're presenting to someone, you can directly pull it out from Palantir, export it into an Excel or PowerPoint file, and then it's up there with up-to-date information. So it's important, I think, as we talk about big data, it's how can we consistently measure it and keep ourselves accountable to what we're doing. So it's not like we're getting lost in segments of data because we're trying to solve one problem, but let's keep ourselves on track and make sure that we're actually measuring our outcomes and hitting the objective that we initially set out to achieve.
Other questions? Rod Chow has a question. Zach will get you the mic.
Don't know if I need the mic. Michael, you talked about internal threats. In large organizations, how do you prevent the damage that a disgruntled government employee or contractor can do to either, again, export the data, as we've seen happen, or to manipulate some of the outcomes and results?
Yeah, thanks. That's a very difficult security problem. A lot of the industry and a lot of thinking has really been dedicated towards external threats, keeping the bad actors out. More recently, people are thinking about, okay, assume bad actors are going to get in, how do you find them within the environment? What you're describing is even more difficult, which is someone that has lawful, legal, reasonable access to your system, making off with something of value, becoming basically an insider. An insider threat is what it's called. There are a number of ways to deal with them, all of which are kind of imperfect, I would say. So the first is, again, kind of approaching this from a theme of strategy, is making sure that people don't have access beyond what they need access to, right? It's very easy for an administrator to set kind of all access to all new employees. It's just very, very easy, and human nature is generally to do what's easiest. So making sure that your employees and your users have the right privileges set so that they cannot access what they should not be accessing is very, very important. Of course, doing the typical employee, screening that you normally do. But these kinds of things only get you so far, right? I mean, the NSA has some of the best security in the world, and they missed Edward Snowden, right? Amongst others who are less famous. So the insider threat's really challenging. One of the ways is actually kind of a big data themed solution, and again, this is kind of a big data conference. Part of the issue is an insider has this kind of normal, I keep calling it lawful, but whatever, access to your system. So how can you judge what they're doing versus someone that's doing something illegal or external? And that's kind of a big data problem. So the way a lot of solutions and vendors approach this is they will basically gather and analyze data from your organization and try to determine a baseline of what normal behavior looks like. And then they will try to extrapolate, okay, this is anomalous behavior against that normal behavior, and hope that the insider's activities leap out as anomalous and unusual. That is something that user behavior analytics companies do. That's kind of what they specialize in. And that's one way that industry and that vendors are trying to figure out the insider threat issue. But this is an ongoing problem. I think there's room for a lot more innovation here. But again, just to sum up, try to do a good screening of your employees, manage their privileges and their accesses, making sure they only access really what they need to. And then, if you really do have a problem, then you're probably looking at a big data security solution like user behavior analytics to try to search through the needle in the haystack. It's a very, very difficult problem, and frankly, still is one even the government struggles with.
While you're formulating your questions, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Supervisor Slocum, who has a question for the panel.
Rob, this question's for you. It might be a little unfair, so forgive me. I'm curious about the notion that kids being in the classroom each and every day is one of the paths to success for those students. And I know from looking through the data that truancy, I guess we still call it truancy, I'm not sure, but kids not being in the classroom, missing class for one reason or another, also affects those students. And the data is pretty startling if you look at it. So the question is, how does your project help with identifying those students who have a pattern of truancy, and then what are some of the other sort of side benefits that this regional data trust could bring? It seems like a very powerful tool, but I'd be curious to hear your ideas on that.
Sure. Thanks for the question. Let me preface my direct response by citing both Supervisor Slocum and Chris's comments about disruption. The Silicon Valley Regional Data Trust is not disruptive in that it's not changing what's actually being done in schools and health and human service agencies. It's laying a new ground on which schools and agencies stand and work. It can trigger, hopefully, disruption created by communities, through policymakers, and by people who work within the agencies and schools who use the data, who use the information in ways that change the way they provide services, change the way they coordinate services, as I said before, and placing the child very much at the heart or the center of our work. So to answer Supervisor Slocum's question directly, for instance, as he points out, truancy, that is a kid not showing up for school, has a very deleterious effect on their academic performance and thus on other aspects of their life. With the data zone, which is the data warehouse that the public schools will have access to, teachers, counselors, principals will have data that's uploaded every night. And so they will know which of their kids are missing a class, part of a class, an entire day on a day-to-day basis. So they can quickly move in and monitor kids' behaviors and intervene. Similarly, because of the ability to share data across agencies, as agencies see fit, a probation officer working in juvenile justice is working with, has as one of her clients a young man. She can go into SVRDT, ask for data on this young man's school data, and see that he has been truant on Wednesday afternoons for the last 2 weeks, and before that was completely absent for a week. And so the probation officer could then meet with the kid, have information that she otherwise wouldn't have, to begin creating intervention on that side, as well as to contact the schools so that the schools and juvenile justice can work together given that shared information. So specifically, in terms of the delivery of day-to-day service at the service level, that's the kind of advantage that the data trust will provide. Similarly, and that's where we're beginning, by the way. We've begun by working with people who are working at the case level to identify the data that each agency has to share and learning what the other agencies can share, what information they would like to be able to tap across agency lines and across county lines. The idea then is to build up the database data systems so that we can aggregate up, so that we can use the data to evaluate programs, to inform the work that administrators are doing to organize programs, to organize instructional practices, to organize interventions in the other agencies. And finally, to aggregate data that will be provided to researchers who can sit down with the practitioners and the administrators and the policymakers to identify the questions that the agencies and schools feel that they need to have answered through research to improve practice, programs, and policies. And then additionally, hopefully the researchers themselves have ideas to contribute, to say, the literature says, you may not be aware of this, the literature says that such and such may be the case. What about our collaborating to conduct research using the data in the data trust, which would be anonymized for the researchers' use, right? But which would not be anonymized, obviously, for the people working at the case level so that they can intervene based upon the intelligence that they gain from the data that they can tap, both within their own agencies or schools and from other agencies that are sharing the data.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Rod. We have a question on the aisle.
Hi, I'm Benny Lee, County San Mateo Project Manager for ISD, as well as a moonlighting councilman for City of San Leandro. And actually this question is pretty important because when we talk about big data, we take a look at companies like Google, Facebook, Twitter. They basically can analyze data down to the details for the individuals, and they've leveraged it for advertising and really targeting individuals. But for county agencies or local agencies, we have access to a lot of data. But one gap that seems to be missing is data science or data scientists, particularly from a security perspective, from a usage perspective, and even from a medical perspective. Can you comment on the need for data science and data scientists with respect to government agencies and the need for that?
Sure, I can take first swing maybe. Yeah, I mean, you're describing what is probably one of the hottest career fields in the industry right now. along with big data, and I'm sure Palantir knows this just as well. You have to have someone that knows how to analyze that big data, and the singularity hasn't quite arrived yet. So that does come down to really smart people that know how to parse through this volumes and troves of information. No question that if you have large data sets, you're going to need people that are able to do exactly that. The problem as I see it is, again, this is probably the most low density, high demand career in the industry. And so, a local government or a county government is going to have to be competitive with Google and Palantir and whoever else for this very, still very small segment of people that have this skill set. So, until very recently, I was the CEO of a cybersecurity company, and we were always on the hunt for data scientists in one way or another, and they could command a higher premium than a number of other engineers and employees could. So I think this is I see that as a real struggle for local governments, is how do you actually attract and maintain that talent when you have some of the biggest companies in the valley after the exact same people. So I don't have a good answer for you. Just a call to service, maybe, right? That's what the federal government does. That's what the Department of Defense does. Is say, do something here you can't do somewhere else. Serve your community, serve your country, serve your fellow citizens and humanity, because it's going to be hard to compete with them on economics.
You've identified something that is a real workforce challenge for local governments. We at the state level have that same issue with the Department of Information Technology. And, how do you make government tech, if you will, sexy and exciting and attractive compared to Silicon Valley and Google and Facebook? It's a real challenge for state government, I'm sure locals as well. Michael, I just wanted to stay with you quickly. You mentioned staying ahead, staying in front of the threats, the evolution of the threats. I guess my question is, we've got local government folks here, we've got local nonprofit folks here, county government, and much of what you're referring to is global in nature, and Chris identified some of those big picture problems globally that we might enter. What's the next generation of threats, if you will? What's going to keep some of these people up at night 2 years from now, 3 years from now? What are these emerging things that we'll be talking about at, Connect 20?
So the trend in cybersecurity is for what was once the purview of nation states to basically become commoditized, and something that used to be only accessible or doable by the Russians or the Chinese or us, eventually becomes cheap and pervasive enough that then you see criminal organizations start using it, and then individual hacktivists and so on and so forth. So I would say what we're seeing affect very large companies today will trickle down and start impacting smaller companies tomorrow. So if I were in local government or a nonprofit, I would be worried about the weaponization of information. I would be worried about that. That is brand new. I don't think we have a good handle on that or a good answer for that at all. I would be really worried about ransomware. Is everybody generally familiar with what ransomware is? That is really taking off, and we're seeing, it used to be this thing where it was kind of done by organized crime, basically, largely coming out of Eastern Europe. Now we're seeing actual countries engage in this, North Korea, other nations, actually doing this to wreak havoc and to gain money, believe it or not. And like actual schools are being hit with these things, right? And student data is being locked up and encrypted. Hospitals, good Lord, they're getting hit all the time. And that trend is just going to keep getting kind of lower and lower and lower until individuals are going to be getting hit with ransomware on their phones. There's not a good answer for that. I would be really, really worried about that. On top of kind of the general, you don't want your, patient records lost in a data theft kind of thing. So this just kind of, it's not zero sum, it's additive, right? So all these kind of security things are adding on top of each other. But I'd be worried about the weaponization of information, and I'd be worried about ransomware, really, if I were a local government or nonprofit.
I think both of our panelists want to comment on that. We just have 3 minutes left, so we'll wrap up with these comments.
I'll just add a quick thought to the data scientist question. I think One thing that we should be careful of as data scientists, high demand in a lot of different industries, is really instituting ethics into data scientists. I mean, these data scientists are going to have tremendous abilities to understand data. And something that we're doing at Palantir through our privacy and civil liberties team is actually engaging with professors at Stanford University in their computer science programs and implementing the curriculum and including pieces of ethics. So how can we're training these computer scientists, how can we institute ethics into a part of that to help them think about what is the consequence of what you're doing with this data? Who is this affecting? So, we're training data scientists that are going to be immensely useful in a variety of fields, but also have in mind ethics, privacy, civil liberties, individual impact, community impact. So, I think that through partnerships where you have industry embedding with universities, state and local government embedding with universities to train and say, this is what we need, and this is the type of person that we're looking for, I think will be important in the future.
Yeah, sort of to tack onto that, in terms of sort of the workforce issue, one of the things we can do is we can train them, right? And so at UC Santa Cruz, for example, we're submitting a proposal to NSF for a training program to train master's and PhD and doctoral students in data science and in the social sciences to prepare them to do this kind of work, to do big data work in the public sector. I mean, there are a lot of really good lawyers who could be making money on the private side who are working in county agencies and in public schools for less money, but because they understand that they can use the law for social good, we can use big data for social good as well. So the preparation, and then I think partnerships, as you were referring to, between the private sector and the public sector. The private sector has expertise, they have technology that the public sector can't even really imagine. And I think at that intersection lies some really positive opportunities for partnership. You were reporting about the work you were doing with natural disasters. If we sort of scale that up to sort of say, to address social issues that are on a day-to-day basis in our local area, I could see Palantir and SGRDT and UC Santa Cruz involved in a really useful set of partnerships that would solve problems, but also address specific issues like the whole human resource piece.
On that optimistic note, let's thank our panel for the discussion.
Appreciate it. Thanks for having me.
Thank you all for your questions, and I'll turn it over to my colleague who will be introducing our next segment, the next Connect Talk, Supervisor Warren Slocum.
Thank you.
Bear with me. Well, as you all know, election hacking, Russian interference in our presidential election is all over the news. Just turn on CNN any night of the week, and you too can get educated on what's been going on. I've known about Barbara Simmons for a very long time, since my role as Registrar of Voters and the whole electronic voting scare, if you will, and have followed her work and have always been very impressed by her thoughts regarding election security. And while she's a computer scientist, she believes, I think, still in paper ballots. So that's sort of an interesting dichotomy. Elections has always been a passion for me, and I'm so pleased that Barbara Simmons has joined us this morning. And so at this point, let me not take any more of her time and introduce to you Barbara Simmons. Thank you. Thank you. It's awfully good to meet you.
Really nice to meet you.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Let's see. So don't need my picture. Okay. Just in comment to the previous panel, I was really pleased to hear about all this joint work being done with public-private institutions, with universities and corporations. And I just wanted to add another potential source of help, and that is professional societies. So, in fact, I'm a former president of ACM, the Association for Computing Machinery, which is the largest and oldest educational computer science society in the world, actually. And we have a component called USACM, which is the U.S. Public Policy Committee of ACM, and there are a lot of concerns about some of the issues that were just being addressed in the last panel. So if anyone is interested in trying to work cooperatively with ACM, please see me after the talk. So I was assigned the title of election hacking, and I decided to make it a little bit more positive because we actually know how to deal with that. We actually have a solution. So that's why the title is protecting our elections. I think you'll all agree that security in elections is a voting rights issue. Basically, the ultimate form of voter disenfranchisement is to go to the polls and then not have your vote counted or not have it counted correctly. So security is very important to basically, as I say, voting rights. Vote and the requirement, and I'm sure all election officials agree with this, that votes should be correctly recorded and counted. So getting back to the negative part, why do 2018 and 2012 matter? And here are a couple of quotes. I'm sure you've seen the James Comey quote, "They'll be back in 2020." And by they, in this case, he meant, I believe, the Russians, although this can certainly apply to other nationalities and organizations as well. They may be back in 2018, and one of the lessons they may draw from this is that they were successful because they introduced chaos and division and discord and sowed doubt about the nature of this amazing country of ours and our democratic process. And to be bipartisan, since Comey is a Republican, here is a quote from Democrat Senator Mark Warner, co-chair of the Senate Intel Committee, saying, "We need a whole government approach to voting security." And again, I think everybody here agrees with that sentiment. If states don't proactively move forward, very shortly we'll be getting into primary season 2018. He was calling for states to take security steps for the upcoming election midterms. So I'm sure that this point has been forcefully made already. Computers ain't perfect. All large programs have software bugs. And so people who haven't really given much thought to the voting machine issue will frequently say, well, but what's the big deal? You just record the votes and count them. It seems pretty trivial. But in fact, these voting machines tend to have a large amount of software in them because they have to work everywhere. And again, as I'm sure you know, election laws vary enormously all around the country and even within states. You know, you can have vote for 3 out of 5. You can have rotation of ballots, as we saw with the recall of Governor Davis. You can have straight party voting. So there are all kinds of issues, and these voting machines have to deal with all of them. And of course, as we've seen, major software vendors like Apple and Microsoft are sending out frequent software fixes. Many of these are to fix security problems. And if it were possible to write perfect software, then Apple and Microsoft would do it, right? It's not possible because software tends to be very complicated, and sometimes a change over here will affect something over here that you knew nothing about. So that's why these fixes are frequently sent out. And of course, voting software, again, because it's large and complicated, is vulnerable to bugs or malware that could impact election results. So we use computers almost everywhere in our elections now. And Warren said that I support paper ballots, which I do, but the paper ballots are associated with computers, actually, and I'll get into that in a minute. So the question is, what happens if a hack is discovered months after an election? So, for example, the Yahoo breach started in 2014, but it was revealed only fairly recently. The DNC breach was not discovered for 6 months. The Equifax hack was discovered at least 2 months after the breach, and that affected 143 million people. And even after it was discovered, a couple of months ago, a security person found that there was malware on the Equifax site that you were supposed to go to deal with this breach. And if you clicked on it, you would be downloading malware onto your computer. That's a bit irresponsible, in my opinion. So internet voting we just define as providing blank ballots over the internet. Providing blank ballots over the internet is not internet voting because it's a blank ballot. Now, there's still security issues with that, but it's relatively secure, certainly compared to the reverse of sending voted ballots over the internet. And that is what is fundamentally insecure. That includes web-based voting, email with PDF attachments. Most faxes are now sent over the internet, and smartphones, of course, go over the internet. So basically, our recommendation for a long time has been no internet voting, no return of voted ballots in any way over the internet. And I should also mention that internet voting is a threat to the secret ballot. And in fact, there are military voters who have been given the opportunity to return voted ballots over the internet, and they have to sign a statement saying they give up their right to the secret ballot. And I think nobody should be put in a position of having to do that. So here's an example of why internet voting is a bad idea. And you'll notice that all of these entities have been hacked, right? And this is only a short list. I mean, there are a lot more I could have added. And then we have this recent NSA attack. So that was just referred to in the last panel. These are quotes from a New York Times article of a couple days ago. The agency, which is regarded as the world's leader in breaking into adversaries' computer networks, failed to protect its own. After 15 months of investigation, we still don't know if it was hacked by Russia, an insider leak, or both. So again, that was another question that came up about insiders. The people investigating this NSA hack really don't know, at least they don't state publicly that they know. And finally, and this is particularly worrisome, the NSA's cyber weapons have now been picked up by hackers from North Korea to Russia and shot back at the United States and its allies. And this is noteworthy for a number of reasons. First of all, we just heard about what's happening with ransomware and so on. When it comes to election hacking, Democrats in 2016 tended to be the victims, but what this is saying is that anybody can be a victim, anybody. And Republicans in Congress, I think, are getting that. I think they understand they too could be hacked by some other country that doesn't like them. So what are electronic voting machines? I don't know. I guess people here are not all election officials, right? So I should probably define this. Okay. So there are things called direct recording electronic, and these were the machines that first, we had them in California for a while. In Palo Alto, we had them when I voted there some years ago. These are typically touchscreen machines that you touch, and it records your vote in the internal memory of the computer. Remember, these things are all computers. So they record your vote in the internal memory of the computer. Initially, almost all of them were paperless, so there was no way to do a recount. And they were sold to election officials because the vendor said, these are completely safe, completely secure, don't worry, they've been federally certified, although the federal certification was very weak and didn't really check very well for security. But they didn't mention that part. And you push a button at the end of the election, you get the results, you go home. And then new and shiny, and everybody loves computers. So there was a massive move to purchase these, and many were purchased in California. So that's one type of machine. The other is the paper ballot, which we tend to use here. Certainly, I live in San Francisco. We vote with paper ballots. We put the ballots into a scanner, and the scanner tabulates them. It reads them and tabulates them. That scanner has a computer. So even though, Warren said I support paper ballots, which I do because these DREs are terrible, the paper ballots are still tabulated by scanners, and you still have to check the scanners because they are computers. So, and then I just want to correct one misconception, that statements have been made that when the voting machines are not connected to the internet, they can't be hacked. This isn't exactly true. Even if they are not connected to the internet, they tend to be programmed. They're programmed using other computers. So the programming that has to be done is the names of the candidates, where they are on the ballots, and so on and so forth. And this is done by computers that could be connected to the internet. it takes only a fraction of a second to download malware. Once the malware has been downloaded, it can be transferred from the computer that programs the voting machines to the voting machines via portable memory, and then those voting machines have been hacked. And I know I'm supposed to be, can I just do one more? Because I want to get to the solution. So we need to check on elections computers. The solution is paper ballots and manual post-election ballot audits. And these are called risk-limiting, the best kind are called risk-limiting audits, which verifies that the computer-declared results are correct. These were invented by Philip Stark, who at the time was the chairman of the statistics departments at UC Berkeley. He's now an associate dean. He's done a lot of hands-on work with election officials, implementing these in various places. And my hope is that I can convince people. In fact, we're working on trying to get California to adopt risk-limiting audits statewide. So I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you, Barbara. Thank you. That was good. Thank you. Thank you.
Sorry, I know.
That's okay. So let's thank Barbara one more time. Thank you, Barbara, for coming here to Connect 17. And if you're following along in your program, it's now time for a break. We'll resume at 10:20. And there are refreshments in the back, and I'm sure you've all found the restrooms and so forth and so on. So let's take a break. Thank you all. Sorry, Jim.
Something tells me you know the material. Hey everybody, if I can get your attention, we're gonna get started. So I hate to interrupt good conversations, but we're getting ready with our last Connect Talk. So grab that last pastry and cup of coffee. Trade business cards so you can keep on talking after the conference. Welcome back. Thank you, everybody. Assemblymember Mullen, that means you. Honestly. Yeah, that's exactly right. Where'd that tie go? Let me get that back. So welcome back, everyone. We're switching subjects and transitioning to mobility, and our final Connect Talk presenter is Mark Rosekind. Mark was appointed by President Obama to serve as the 15th administrator of the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, and earlier this year, Mark joined Zoox, an autonomous vehicle startup company, as their Chief Safety Innovation Officer. I first met Mark earlier this year and still remember some of the statistics that he cited on transportation safety. I think it was 35,092. Is that right?
Yeah.
And
it's up.
And it's going up.
Yeah.
Every year, 35,092 people die in car accidents in the United States, and it's increasing, which is all the more reason for technology to improve the safety of our transportation systems. So Mark's going to provide some thoughts on proactive safety, mobility, and sustainability. Please join me in welcoming Mark Rosekind.
Thank you, Mark. So what he didn't tell you was I'm third generation San Francisco, grew up in San Bruno, Foster City. My home's been in Mountain View for about 25 years. So I have a whole bunch of suits and ties that are sitting in the closet now that hopefully will not be coming out forever, right? So I think it's such a kick to come back and all of a sudden find out, got to take it off, right? Okay, don't even start with it. So first of all, everybody put your seatbelts on. We're going to get this to work because the biggest changes in transportation in a century since Henry Ford are happening to you right now. I'm checking. I used to head the safety regulatory agency for the country. I'm checking. Get those seatbelts on, ready? Because this change is going on. It's the biggest in 100 years, and it is affecting everybody. And what I'm going to do is really talk about the top 3 things that are going to be huge benefits and advantages to your life. And I'm going to go through these, give you what the advantages are. We'll talk about the magic that's coming, which is all the technology that's going to make this happen. And then quickly, we're going to also talk about what some of the challenges are. And believe it or not, I'm going to actually try and leave a minute at the end so we could take a question or two if you would like, all right? So the first thing is, if you think about it, transportation is such a big deal because it touches every one of us every single day. And it's all about moving people and goods, right? We actually pay a pretty high price for that. That's in the next slide that's coming. But what's really interesting is this new mobility revolution that is coming. We are talking about making this transportation system more productive. Just think, a fully autonomous car. You can now be reading, sleeping intentionally, right? Or doing anything else you want. More productive, more efficient, no congestion. Could there be higher speed limits if we can actually put them closer and they're not going to hit each other? And more cost effective. There's not going to be 2 cars in your garage. There might not even be 1 car in your garage. And I think what's really interesting is there's some people that are going to only know transportation and mobility as a service because they're never going to get their driver's license or own a vehicle. The other thing that's down there that's kind of interesting is a lot of years, transportation has actually divided communities, where there just isn't access for people to do what they have to do every day. This new revolution that's coming actually has an opportunity for some greater equity, where transportation actually becomes a unifier instead of a divider. So this is the number. It's up for 2016, 37,461. When I was head of NHTSA, I made sure everybody knew exactly what that number was, the exact number. Because people love to say, oh, it's, close to 38,000. Every one of those is somebody you know. That is a father, mother, brother, sister, coworker, one of your neighbors. Everybody's been touched by this. And what's really interesting is when you think about this on a larger scale, this is the biggest jumbo jet you can think of crashing every week for an entire year. So if we did that in the United States, we'd close the entire air system after about a week, and yet this has been going on for 50 years since we've been counting. And what's really, really challenging for us is we know that 94% of the 6.3 million crashes that happen every single year are because of us. So what's the magic sauce about the technology? A fully autonomous vehicle will not get drunk, right? Will not drive drowsy, will not drive distracted. So we're talking about when people say, how much safer can we get? There's your first target, eliminating 94% of crashes that are related to us, the humans. So last thing I just want to mention here quickly. So mobility, safety is a huge opportunity. And the third advantage is transportation is the #2 contributor in the United States to greenhouse gases. So Professor Hawkins, just a few months ago, said we have about 100 years to find a new home. Okay? So when you think about electrifying all these new fleets or finding other alternate fuels, this is probably the biggest transition for us as a society when we think about what this could mean. Mobility, safety, sustainability. These are three huge, my wife says I'm not supposed to use that word anymore, but these are like huge things that will touch absolutely every person's life every single day. So keep the seatbelt on because the technology is already here. This is the magic sauce. People are like, well, what's coming? This stuff is already, I love this. When I was administrator, people would always say, when is this going to happen? And it's already here. So many of these things are already on your vehicles. And you can have not just cruise control, but adaptive cruise control. And you can have blind spot monitoring and lane keeping. And there's autopilot in Teslas. This technology is already in vehicles. In fact, one of the things we did at NHTSA that was really groundbreaking was we challenged the industry to make automatic emergency braking. Your car will stop so it won't hit anything. Don't hit stuff, right? And we actually challenged the industry to say, make that standard, not just an option or a high end, make it standard across all your lines. We should all benefit from that. So by regulation, probably take us at least 10 years to make that happen. And we challenged the industry, and 99.6% of all new vehicles by 2022 will have automatic emergency braking. Because 20 global automakers said, fine, we'll do that without having to do the regulation. I say that because that will beat regulation by 3 or 4 years, which means we can count the lives saved and crashes eliminated by not hitting. And AEB, we're talking 40% of rear-end crashes eliminated, 29% of front-end. Okay, so this technology is already out there. We have to democratize it so everybody gets it and gets the benefits. But this magic sauce is already there. And what are the challenges for all of us to acknowledge what's coming? The top one is there because it's a test. Okay? When people say autonomous vehicles, that's a lot of things. So ADAS, extra credit if you know what that is, but I won't make you actually write it down. So those are advanced driver assistance systems. Advanced driver assistance systems. That's all that technology I just told you about. But they're individual or packages of things that assist and support the driving task. That's different from an autonomous vehicle. We're getting rid of the steering wheel. We're getting rid of the brake pedal. We're getting rid of the driver. Okay, a fully autonomous vehicle, a fully self-driving car is going to drive itself and you safely, right? So that's one of the first things is for all of us just to get educated enough to make sure that we know the difference between all these different technologies and autonomous vehicles. Very different things. Next, guess what? Every technological transformation that occurs in our country, jobs get created, jobs get disrupted. So you got to know that's coming. Right now, everybody's talking about the jobs we're going to lose. What's really interesting is people aren't really quantifying yet the jobs we're going to gain. Great Wired article, and I'm going to get the statistic wrong, but it was really fascinating. Somebody actually identified in the 1950 census of the 271 jobs, all the occupations that were identified. In the last one, 60 years later, there was only one job that was no longer actually on the census. Any idea what that might be? Think about that, 60 years, all the changes and the revolution of, right, industries, technology, elevator operator. Which is a perfect example of the technology challenge we have, right? Are people going to get into that? Okay, so we're almost there, because that's the last one on the year. The other is a transition. Just for everyone to think about this, it's actually going to be 20 or 30 years for this full transition to take place. We're going to have people with their hands on their wheels, semi-autonomous vehicles, and fully autonomous, no driver, on the same roads for 20 or 30 years. The average length of a lifespan for a car right now is 11.5 years. Okay, so if you look at the fleet, it typically takes 20 to 30 years for the entire fleet, 265 million vehicles on a road. usually takes 20 or 30 years for that to turn over. So even if you had the perfect technology or the perfect vehicle today, it's still going to take you 20 or 30 years to actually see all those benefits that we were talking about. We're not thinking about it a lot, but people got to start focusing on this transition period because there's going to be a lot of change. And I put the last one in there because basically this is the biggest thing. You going to trust it? I'm back to the elevator operator. Why did that position stay all those years, right? Am I going to get in there and go up or down? And, you know, having that human push that button for a long, long time made us feel comfortable to do that. I think trust for all of us in robots and machines and giving up the wheel and control, that's going to be one of the biggest things for us to figure out how much this is really going to change our society. And my last slide here actually is going to be moderating a panel. I asked Chris Gerdes, who's a professor at Stanford, a friend of mine, been doing this stuff for 20 plus years. Chris, what's going to change with this new revolution coming? And his answer was basically everything. So what's really interesting is people are going to focus on the technology. You need to focus on how life changes. Not just that you or a family member could be alive, because they're not going to be hurt or killed in a crash, but also just think about what this means for an aging population that doesn't have to give up. They can give up their keys, but they don't have to give up their mobility. A disabled community that is so excited about this, they never had a license, they don't need a license anymore. And even kids, right? So what's really interesting is we're talking about for everybody, this is going to touch your life. It's going to be the most significant mobility revolution literally in 100 years. And this is buckle up, folks, because this is going to be the ride of your life, and it's already here. Thank you. I still have a minute if you'd like to ask a question. Yes? I got you. Go ahead.
Okay, so I'm Emily Beach, a council member in the city of Burlingame. I also sit on the Transportation Authority. So this has huge implications for our infrastructure. We're an innovative part of the world. Sorry. Okay, so maybe I'll ask it for the sake. So Emily Beach, city of Burlingame, a council member. I also sit on the Transportation Authority, board of directors in San Mateo County, and it has huge implications for how we deal with infrastructure for the automobile. So I'm curious, knowing that we are such an innovative part of the world, do you envision this transformation, which you say it does take maybe 20, 30 years to really mass, affect the whole society? Do you see us adopting, what do you see the speed at which the Silicon Valley will start to adopt this faster than the rest of the world? And should we be thinking about, how can you give us seeds of thought as we look at our infrastructure?
So I think just
particularly highway.
And I think just the fact that you're asking that question, what's really critical is these changes are coming. And I've seen this with everybody. The last two hearings I did in the House and the Senate were all about job displacement. I'm sitting there thinking, okay, you have 20 or 30 years to figure this out. Let's start now. Same thing with your question. This means changing how we pour concrete, the number of parking spaces, curbs for drop-off, et cetera. Start planning it now. San Francisco's starting some pilot studies. Here, it's like, how does this affect us and how do we change now in our planning for the future? That's what we can do with this, I think. And that's what's actually good about that 20 or 30 year transition. It's not going to be tomorrow. I hope the Valley will be really quick in doing this because the benefits are so tremendous. But it's going to take a while. So we have time to figure all those pieces out. So I'm going to stop because that's what it says there.
Thank you, Mark.
There you go.
Let's all give Mark a round of applause.
Thanks.
Thank you very much. Really appreciate it. Well, as we just heard, rapidly advancing technology will soon change how we approach mobility. It is currently changing how we approach mobility, the movement of goods and people. And apart from shifting the auto-centric model, there are significant policy implications and opportunities with electric and autonomous vehicles, ride-sharing, and other transportation advancements. Our next panel, the Age of Autonomous Things, brings together 3 companies who will provide insight on what we anticipate to be a paradigm shift in the coming decade. And joining me to introduce the panel is Samsida President and CEO, Roseanne Faust. Thanks, Roseanne.
So what I'd like to do, thank you, we'd like to bring up our 3 panelists. So we have Ryan Popple, who is the CEO of Proterra. We have Peter Gigante, who is the head of policy research for Lyft. And Peter is going to tell you why I pronounced his name like that. And we have Ryan Toohey, who's the VP of Business Development for Starship Technologies. All 3 of these individuals will give you a snippet of their companies and kind of the age of autonomy. And then we're going to go into Q&A from the public. So get your questions ready. Thank you for being here.
Thanks. Oh, should I join up?
Oh,
here?
yeah, here.
Thanks.
Hey, how are you?
Good to meet you. So I missed the very last part of that. Do you want us to go ahead and start?
Yes. Who is, let's see, Ryan, you are listed first, so I'm guessing your slides are queued up first.
Yes, thanks. All right, good morning, everybody. I'm going to cover, most of my presentation will be about the electrification of fleet vehicles. Although the panel is Age of Autonomous Things, most of what we're deploying in the market today is a high-efficiency electric vehicle with some autonomous capability. The reason I'm going to focus on how far we've come in terms of fleet electrification is I think it is very important that we look at these technologies synergistically. So I think for us, it's important to understand where the market is today. There's absolutely no reason at all why we have to implement, thank you, AV technology onto our legacy drivetrain technology. And there's a good probability that vehicle miles traveled will go up with AV. So it's absolutely critical that we implement the most sustainable and zero-emission drivetrain possible. One comment I'd add to the last presentation is in the state of California, transportation is our #1 source of greenhouse gas emissions. So while we've done an excellent job of reducing the energy impact of the built environment and the grid, we have a long way to go on transportation, and it's getting worse. So without further ado, let me walk you through my clicker is not autonomous. There we go. All right, so Proterra, what do? We're an electric vehicle manufacturer for the mass transit vehicle industry. This technology will not remain just in mass transit, but for many reasons we decided to deploy fleet electric vehicle technology into public transit first. We are headquartered in Burlingame, California, right down the road from here, and I think that's an important thing to talk about today. If we are forward thinking on these technologies, if we are the early deployment markets for these technologies, we're going to have the jobs. If Proterra did not exist, the electric vehicle mass transit market in the United States would be defined by Chinese companies. And the engineering jobs and the intellectual property stays in the home country. So we have a choice to make in all of these technologies. Do we want to import it or do we want to create it? And if we import it, we may pick up some of the sales and service jobs. We will not pick up any of the competitive advantage or the manufacturing. So I'm incredibly proud of the fact that in addition to having a bunch of traditional rocket scientists, smart engineers on staff, which is what we do well in Silicon Valley, we also have manufacturing in the Bay Area. We have manufacturing in LA County, and we have manufacturing in Greenville, South Carolina. So we're a 350-person company. 5 years ago, we were probably a 50-person company. And if you measure that effect with our supply chain, 70% of the parts we use in this vehicle come from other US companies, like a motor manufacturer in Colorado, a composite body manufacturer in Rhode Island. Next slide. I'll do a wink or a... So this is the presentation that I didn't cut down. Can we pull up the shortened one? Or the one that we edited down? My staff thought I was the keynote speaker at the UN Summit for Sustainability. So they sent over 50 slides covering climate change, urban inequality, advanced mobility. So we deleted some of them. Yeah. Is this the updated one? Okay, great. Okay, awesome. So first point is we make transit buses. Transit buses are just one of the cogs in a multimodal transportation world. For those of you who drove over here this morning, you can see in this parking lot how economically inefficient we currently are. We are very forward thinking in the Bay Area, but we're not moving nearly as fast as many other parts of the world in eliminating our dependency on car culture. You will not hear me try to convince you that electric mass transit buses, whether autonomous or driven, are the future of transportation infrastructure. They're just one building block. And you look at these technologies, and on one side of the spectrum, you've got convenience. On the other side of the spectrum, you have efficiency. We will probably have autonomous flying EV taxis, but most of the people who work at my company will not be able to afford rides on them. We will still be dependent on mass transit for the backbone of our society's transportation. So it's very important that we clean that up. We see in particular in the Bay Area, there's a transportation gap, and it's so severe that companies like Google, Facebook, Genentech, LinkedIn, probably this company as well, they have purchased and deployed over 1,000 heavy-duty diesel buses to make up for the lack of mass transit infrastructure. So we are very forward-thinking in California. We are also car culture in California. And what we're finding is with young knowledge workers in particular, they have much less interest in driving a car than their parents' generation did. Also, as Americans, we've taken productivity gains to our pocketbook, not to our work-life balance. So all this technology has not made our workday shorter. So a lot of these engineers at Facebook and Google, they want to be driven to work, whether by a robot or a human being, so they can get an hour of work done on the way, an hour of work done on the way home, and they can actually play with their kids or hang out with their friends when they get home. So the most popular way to get to work, if you work at Apple or if you work at Facebook, and a deal breaker in terms of accepting a job for many high-value employees, is whether or not they can access some form of mass transit. Obviously, we need more if private companies have a fleet that is larger than San Francisco's bus fleet. So we're going to have a lot of transit, a lot of urbanization. One of the points I want to make is there's a massive amount of pollution associated with the current way we move everything. In transportation, we're still critically dependent on oil. We saw that during the hurricanes, the number of systems that went down within days simply from shutting down a few refineries in Texas. So mass transit is green from a congestion perspective, but from a local air quality perspective, our transit system, in particular in the Bay Area, is still a diesel system. There's a small auto manufacturer based in Germany called Volkswagen that educated the entire world recently on how dangerous diesel pollution is. But all pollution is not created equal. Diesel gives you particulate matter, and particulate matter is a known carcinogen. It's about the nastiest pollutant that comes out of a vehicle that you can expose children to, people with respiratory conditions, elderly. And in the Bay Area, we're way behind the rest of California. If you look at Southern California, they moved to natural gas first. Multiple cities have also declared that they will be 100% electric by 2030. We only have 2 transit agencies in the Bay Area that have a zero-emission vehicle action plan. One is Stockton, one is San Jose. The rest of them are fairly undefined about it. So again, we are very green. I just sometimes think we take our green for granted and assume that someone else is doing it. We should not be behind Southern California in electric vehicle adoption. One of the reasons why we're so passionate about cracking this market open for electric vehicles and mass transit is mass transit tends to be the tip of the spear in terms of heavy-duty vehicle technology. The mass transit vehicle, it's kind of like the sports car of heavy vehicles. It's the most expensive vehicle. It's a relatively small market. It's a very difficult market to serve. The vehicles have to last 12 years. So just like Tesla started with the Roadster as the first place to bring electric vehicle technology, believe it or not, the high price point premium category in heavy duty is the city bus. It's going to start with city bus. It's going to go to school bus. It's going to go to garbage trucks. And the holy grail is going to be sub 300-mile delivery trucks. If we could get those assets off of diesel and onto EV, we would significantly improve the air quality in the Bay Area. It would have a massive effect on greenhouse gases, but more acutely, those spare the air days, the days when you can taste the air, a lot of that is particulate matter. And it's not necessarily your cars, it's trucks, buses, school buses. And I think we are going to look back and conclude that probably the worst thing we were doing with fossil fuels from a transportation perspective was school buses. Proterra doesn't build school buses. We're looking at going into this market with some other partner companies. But the more I've learned about diesel, the crazier I think it is that we have diesel pollution anywhere near school-age children. I got 3 kids, 12 and under. This is a really serious problem. I don't think we're estimating the cost of it at all. It's also an inequality problem. The kids of the parents who are working at Facebook and Google are getting dropped off by a Land Rover plug-in hybrid third-row seat SUV. Kids in East Palo Alto, Oakland are primarily going to school on buses, or they're walking or they're taking a city bus. So the diesel is closest to the communities of color, the disadvantaged communities. So there's a better way. The good news about electric vehicles and California in particular is we've already done a pretty good job of cleaning up the grid. Last thing I read is it's possible that we hit our 50% renewable portfolio standard for the electrical grid in California 10 years early. So if we're going to have all that clean electricity, we should figure out other things to do with it. So this is what we do as a company. We build battery electric buses. They're really awesome vehicles. They're carbon fiber, composite. They run on electric motors, batteries, similar types of battery technology that you see in all these EVs. But the neat thing is the average income of a Proterra bus rider is significantly different than the average income of a brand new EV car driver. From a greenhouse gas perspective, for those of you who represent an agency that has a climate change target, electric buses are a nice arrow in the quiver in that you're looking at an 80% greenhouse gas reduction. That's on a well-to-wheel basis. In California, it's a little hard to read there, but it's the middle bar. We estimate that today it's an 88% reduction because we've largely weaned ourselves off of coal in terms of our grid. The cleanest, cheapest electric vehicle fuel we know of is the Pacific Northwest. We have, not surprisingly, our largest market is California. Second largest, though, is Washington State. We refer to them as the Saudi Arabia of electricity. They have hydroelectric and they have wind. So on a mile per gallon basis, an electric bus in Seattle gets the cost equivalent of 45 miles per gallon. So electricity is getting cheaper, it's getting greener, and we should be using it as much as possible. Main takeaway here is that mass transit buses are a very efficient, low-cost way to move a lot of people who are going the same place at the same time, like work, an event to the city. You combine a mass transit vehicle with an electric vehicle drivetrain, and you have the lowest cost, lowest environmental impact. This is a really important point. When we add AV into this equation, if we can put these three together, I think we're going to have the lowest cost, lowest carbon option. People are still going to take a variety of forms of transportation. You see it in the city. We're going to have bikes, walking, electric scooters, autonomous electric taxis. Some of them may fly as well. But we're still going to need those trains and we're going to still need those buses, especially for people who need to save every transportation dollar they possibly can. By the way, that's the majority of Americans. This is also a very important takeaway. This has already happened. So I'm not here to convince you that electric buses are a good idea. My main thing I want to accomplish in the Bay Area is just to get the Bay Area to catch up. We tend to assume that if it's green and it's high tech, it's happening here. We have electric buses on the streets in Nashville, Louisville, Lexington. Savannah, Georgia just passed a city council resolution saying they're not going to buy another diesel bus. Park City, Utah, but all these little dots are fleets where we've already deployed. Third largest market is Texas. So this is a best practice even if you're not a left coast state. So this is a tool, it's right there. We even have utilities like PG&E that are mandated by law, SB 32, to facilitate and fund electric vehicle infrastructure. So this is an area where I hope we can leapfrog ahead. It would be a shame for the Bay Area to actually have to be covered by a state-level mandate, which may actually happen before some of the agencies around here have purchased their first electric vehicle. So we got to move faster on this, and it'll be a really good thing from a local air quality perspective. So that's it. And appreciate any questions you've got. We have a little bit of AV going on in our fleet, but we're primarily electric vehicle experts. Mark, do you want me to wait till the end for questions or take some now?
Wait till the end. That'd be
Got it. Okay.
Yeah, we're going to do all three speakers and then take group Q&A.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Ryan.
And I'm going to ask our team if the timer, whoever was responsible for timing, can make sure that they're keeping us on track up here. So, thanks.
Give me the hook.
You were great, Ryan. We're going to keep everybody else on time. So there you go.
We'll be quick about it. Good morning, everybody. As Roseanne mentioned, my name is Peter Gigante. I lead the policy research team at Lyft. I've been there for about 4.5 years, so very deeply embedded in all things transportation and specifically ride sharing. Gigante was just because when I moved to California, my first time, everyone was calling me Mr. Gigante, and I didn't quite understand why until I found out that our lovely baseball team goes by the Gigantes. So there we are. You can call me whatever you like, but it's not late for dinner. So just wanted to talk about, this is a presentation we've given lots of times before, mostly to actually transit agencies of all groups, but I think this is some widely applicable information. Actually, just by show of hands, how many people have actually taken a Lyft? All right. Lots of you. Cool. That's great. So I'm not going to go too much into how it works, but I'm going to tell you sort of where it came from and where we're going with it. So Lyft started in 2012 in San Francisco, as you probably know. What most people don't know is before that, it was a company called Zimride. And Zimride was the same two founders, John Zimmer and Lucan Green, who figured out that there should be some sort of web presence where people can offer seats in their cars for trips that they're already planning to make. And this was very popular with college students. A lot of people were planning spring break trips or holiday trips and offering seats in their cars, but it never seemed to get the real volume that they were looking for. And they realized that after the dawn of mobile technology that, hey, we could probably do this with shorter distance inner city trips on demand. And could we convince people to let other people into their cars? Carpooling programs had been around for decades. Most of them were never successful, and economics and trust were really the two major issues into why that never worked. Sort of leveraging mobile technology and social networks, turns out, yes, you can actually get people to offer up seats in their cars. And so this is what we're seeing is an average car for most people is used maybe 4% of its lifetime. You're usually driving it alone. So there's lots of opportunity for getting those seats filled if you give people enough incentive. And so generally thinking about the commuter choice, you've seen that there's been two major modes, right? It's either you drive yourself, which is how most of America gets around, or transit, but there really wasn't a lot of micro-transit in between. What other options are there? And for someone like me, I am 36 years old. I've never had a driver's license. I've lived in New York. I've lived in San Francisco. So expanding transportation options that don't involve a driver's license are really important to me. And so Lyft, when it came along, was really an amazing revolution. And so we're looking at a shift from how we normally think about it, that you need to have a car, you need to have a license, and this is something that you drive yourself, into an option, a universe that's expanding into a portfolio of transportation options. And we think this is important for the current situation. We also think it's very important going into the future. We know that traffic and congestion in cities is getting more severe as we're getting larger cities and more people. Even in San Francisco, we see massive housing construction going on, which is long overdue, which is great. But also, how do we move that many more people around the city in an efficient manner? And if everyone believes that they still need to own their own personal vehicle, that's not going to work. And this is where we have seen growth in Lyft in general, which is great, and growth specifically in Lyft Line, which is the shared ride mode. We know that where it's available, 40% of our customers have chosen a shared ride mode. That's huge. When you think about the millions of people that are using Lyft on a weekly basis, that is a massive amount of sharing going on, sharing of rides that normally wouldn't have been before. So we think that that's really fantastic. So ways that we're looking at being sustainable and really getting at reducing vehicle miles traveled, get vehicle occupancy up. We know that can be done if you have the right incentives and the right systems in place. Pricing of car trips, so people are much more aware now of the cost of transportation when it's not all baked into the cost of a vehicle. Most people they don't think about what does this trip to the grocery store cost me. They think about sort of the monthly fees associated with it, but even then it's still very abstracted. Whereas if you actually get people thinking about the cost of every trip that they take, they make smarter choices. Also connecting to transit. I know you've probably seen some articles out there that say Lyft and competitors are being competitive with transit agencies, and I think that is very much not the case. Two reasons. One, the business opportunity is not against transit riders, it is against personal vehicle owners. So if we can convince you to give up your car for the benefit of society, that's an enormous amount of money. As trillions of dollars are spent on personal vehicles every year, transit riders are generally not going to bring in that scale of revenue. And so we think that there's also a lot of opportunity, especially in suburban areas, to connect with transit. We know that people out there don't have a lot of opportunities. It's usually just your car, maybe a bus line, maybe there's one rail station that passes through, but you're really not having this full portfolio of options. And so it's really important for those people as well to have more options. And as someone mentioned before, people with disabilities, senior communities, there's huge opportunity there, which we're also moving into. You may have seen articles where we've been very involved with non-emergency medical transport. Those are sort of paratransit-like systems that get people to and from medical appointments that are not emergency. There's just transportation is so distributed through lots of different aspects of our lives, and so making a system that is efficient and affordable is really at the core of what we're trying to do. Sort of addressed that already. Last mile connections, suburban transit, on-demand paratransit, off-peak service. We know large portions, I think about 40% of our rides are happening nights and weekends, which is when most transit agencies would say that they don't focus on their service. Most of their service is focused on commuter rides. Go Centennial. This is a partnership, just by example, we did with Centennial, Colorado. They will fully subsidize rides to and from the station within this little geofenced area. They realized that their circulator bus system was really inefficient and very expensive per ride. We're looking for active solutions to get a better customer experience at a lower price point. And so far, this has been sort of the shining example of where this all kind of works together. So talking about the road ahead, obviously we see there's a huge opportunity with autonomous vehicles, but we know there's a big debate about how does autonomous roll out, how does it look, if everyone buys an autonomous vehicle, not great. We know that there's some really terrible scenarios that have been modeled out. Where we get the benefit of autonomous is really what is the triple revolution. This may have been something that you've heard from academic circles, certainly Dan Sperling and UCLA's Transit Institute, but this is what everyone's hopeful for, is the shared electrified autonomous fleets. And so this is shared, meaning more of a ride-sharing model. You don't own the vehicle, you use the vehicle when you need to use the vehicle. The vehicles themselves are on electric powertrains, and certainly the autonomous function brings down a lot of the cost of the transportation. And so we want to make sure that this model is available to everybody equitably. Obviously, these things are better together. This is just a picture of the Chevy Bolt. This is a vehicle that is already on the Lyft platform through our Express Drive program. So there are Lyft drivers who are driving fully electric vehicles in California, and I believe in Chicago. We know that there's a lot of work to be done on the electric grid to make sure that we have capacity to keep adding these vehicles. But we know that there's a lot of incentive in California to do that. We think this will be a model for the rest of the country. And we know that these electrified vehicles obviously bring down emissions significantly. We know also that these vehicles, electric vehicles, are not very cost effective for the average consumer. If you're only using it 4% of the time, each of those trips is very expensive. But we know that there's a tipping point when you're putting it onto a fleet model where they're operated continuously. The per mile cost is actually quite low and very attractive. So this is just some studies from the Rocky Mountain Institute looking at the reductions in greenhouse gas, and like I said, that price point where the tipping, they find about $200 billion can be saved between gasoline and long-range EVs if you're looking at a fleet model. Know that automation can really drop the cost of transportation. We think this is really great for especially the communities mentioned before, low income and people with disabilities and senior communities, people on fixed incomes. And this is what we're really hoping. We're really hoping that private car ownership will basically be over. We have seen it's the 50s sort of fantasy of what America was with your private car. For most people, especially those living in cities, is no longer that. It's really a hassle. It's if you look at people in their cars, I do this all the time because I'm always in the passenger seat. People want to be doing anything else but driving. Eating, putting on makeup, singing, watching a video, anything. So it's very clear that people are less interested in the actual act of driving for the most part than we've been led to believe. And so we imagine that this will continue. Private car ownership could continue, but think of it maybe more like horses. You can still own a horse, you can still ride a horse, but it's not going to be your primary mode of transportation anymore. And so, yeah, we're thinking, there's going to be a subscription program. That's how we're kind of thinking how this would work. We know that autonomous is in the long term. There's going to be a sort of a transition period when there will be human drivers, and we know that for the foreseeable few years, there's going to be more drivers necessary to meet some of this demand. But we do know that it's actually been very effective at getting people to at least consider giving up their personal vehicle, which is a huge mental shift from even just 5-6 years ago. We've seen somewhere between 4 and 9% of people using ride sharing currently, even without autonomous technology, just currently have at least considered giving up their vehicle. And we think about 4% have actually done it, at least partially because of ride sharing and the confidence that it gives you in your transportation. Just a little bit about smart lanes. We support smart lanes and congestion pricing. We think those are important. And this really quickly, it's a remodel of, so we worked with Nelson Nygaard, which is one of the major transportation planning consulting groups, and how do we redesign Wilshire Boulevard in Beverly Hills? This is what it used to look like, very mixed purpose, general purpose lanes, turn lanes, and in an autonomous connected realm, they've actually taken the same space and used it better and increased the throughput. Added a bike lane, a protected bike lane, general purpose lanes, and loading zones for those autonomous vehicles. And so this is just to say that we are getting very much invested in the future of what the city infrastructure looks like as well. And so we've been very, very present in San Francisco, especially looking at how do we redesign cities to really accommodate the future of autonomous vehicles. So thank you very much.
Awesome. Thank you. I think if you just hit it, it'll work.
Yeah, that was actually-
If not, we'll figure it out.
Okay, good enough. Hello, my name is Ryan Toohey. I joined about a month and a half ago Starship Technologies as a Senior Vice President of Business Development. We make autonomous delivery robots. And I put together a few slides myself this morning, which to give an overview, and I'm really excited to perhaps be introducing to the concept to some of the people here. Perhaps you already know about it, and then hopefully we'll get into an opportunity to ask some questions about what your thoughts and concerns might be. So this is a picture of our robot. This is actually not the most recent robot, but it's the most recent one in production. Our robots are designed to be small, slow, and inherently safe. They're also cute, and if I don't get that, I'm not offended. I'm not like at that point yet, but I've basically been on the road for the last 6 weeks, and we usually bring a robot with us, and most people say it's cute. That's not an accident. Our founders founded Skype. Jonas Fries, in particular, is a very passionate designer, and he knew that when he wanted to create this new mode of efficient, safe, environmental transportation, that we'd be introducing it into the pedestrian environment. So it was very important that it be safe and that it appear safe, and that when people interact with it or they see it, they feel good and they don't feel threatened. So we are here to make local delivery convenient, efficient, and fun. I think this is a statement we've been using for a while. If we think about delivery, it can mean a variety of things. It could be bringing something to you. It could be getting something from you. A lot of different models and applications that we're frankly experimenting with various partners right now. Okay, so again, launched by Skype founders, this company has been in research and development phase for over 3 years. For me, as a business person, to come in now, to have so much invested in the safety and the autonomy of these vehicles, it's been going on primarily in Europe, significant capital investment. It's the kind of thing you only get to do if you're already a successful entrepreneur, to wait that long before you try to commercialize and really be super conservative about what is the right time to bring these robots into more of a mainstream social environment. We've been running pilots with 10 partners around the world. We're in Europe and the United States. Frankly, historically, more of our operations have been in Europe. We are now a U.S. company based here in San Francisco. That's part of bringing me on and really shifting the focus of the company. So what is the delivery robot? Personal delivery device, PDD, maybe that'll stick, maybe it won't. But it's a delivery device that operates in the pedestrian domains, so sidewalks, crosswalks, footpaths, right? So as such, it's meant to operate at pedestrian speeds. We're running at a max speed of 4 miles per hour. Average speed per delivery is actually a little bit lower. In most of the places where we've been approved, we have the possibility of going faster. It's something we might want to do, for instance, in a crosswalk where most people walk faster across a busy crosswalk. Maybe the robot should too. I'm not a science guy, but it's got 9 cameras, it's got radar, it's got different kinds of sensors. Some of it's for cars that are fast and far away. Some of it's for 2 centimeters around it. Its avoidance collision software is tested and tested and tested. I can say that the safety and environmentalism are the 2 sort of values that really are embedded in the culture to the point where we're uber or extremely safe in terms of testing things. So in terms of social acceptance, we've encountered about 12 million people around the world. 80% of them don't react. I was surprised by that. I really wanted to test that. I'm like, really? How could people not react to that thing? But most of the time they don't. People, every partner meeting I go to, they ask me if the robot's ever been stolen. Knock on wood, we've not lost a robot to theft. The most common time I get really asked about this is when I'm talking to a dean of a university. And I tell the dean, well, if it happens, we have 9 cameras. We'll be able to show you them doing it, and we'll be able to tell you which dorm room or fraternity or sorority house it's located in. Because it does have the equivalent of, it has a self-powered tracking device which is concealed within the sort of the innards of the robot. So even if you take out the primary battery source. You know, this is real. You know, the funny thing is, an earlier version of the robot, the antenna was rigid, and this encounter was happening so often that it's now a flexible antenna. So in Washington, D.C. this year, we actually saw on Instagram children dressing up as Starship robots. I'm sure that they knew somebody. I mean, we're not mainstream yet, but it was cute, and they were on Instagram. In the United States, our main operations are in Washington, D.C. and here in the Bay Area, although we do have some operations in Fayetteville, Arkansas. We have run over 65,000 miles with these robots. Okay, and that's really important because you need a lot of data before you can start combining that with your software and your artificial intelligence to really start driving autonomously. We've made over 10,000 commercial deliveries, and that's all with a R&D fleet of about 150 robots, which we expect to expand significantly. And you know, we're running pilots in the Bay Area. My focus on you know, the next 6, 9, 12 months is really looking at great applications on private land and on public land here in the Bay Area, because we are a Bay Area company now, and to see where we can take this. From an environmental standpoint, not only are they electric, they use about the same amount of electricity as an old-fashioned 50-watt light bulb, and about half of that is to move the vehicle, and about half of that is to send the enormous amount of navigation data that it sends back. But really, that's all I put together for today, so I'll give back some of the time that we're owing from this section, and then maybe we can move on to Q&A.
Thank
you. So I think, Rich, you had a question earlier. Do you still have it? Because we'll have you kick it off.
I'm so excited about everything that's happening. I just hope I live long enough to see the results of much of this. But I viewed a PBS special in 1955 about autonomous vehicles. And the technology then was the driver driving onto a highway and connecting electronically with a cable under the roadway. So this is not a new idea. It's a revolutionary idea for us now, but it's been kicked around for a long time. My question is about logistics. The diesel emissions from the way we've changed our warehousing and delivery of goods is increased dramatically. Safeway and Lucky's used to have their warehouses in the Bay Area. It's now in Merced and out near 505 for Safeway. Is there any plans that will, A, eliminate all of the truck traffic that's really clogging 580 and bring these logistics back home so that we're not faced with all of this all of this diesel emissions from trucks that are traveling 3 times the miles they used to make deliveries?
I can speak to what I've seen in the heavy-duty sector. In the last 18 months, we've seen a dramatic uptick in interest from fleets and the manufacturers themselves to figure out EV and to figure out AV. On Thursday of this week, I think at 8 p.m., Tesla will unveil their semi-truck, which is a Class 8 truck that's acceleration, hill climb capability, everything we've heard. It's going to be remarkable. It's a sub 300-mile range truck, so it's designed to really deal with that, I guess, that intermodal problem. What we know of the trucking industry is trucking has changed a lot. It's very difficult for the truck industry to hire long-range drivers. We've invested in rail, so you're exactly right. The new hub and spoke models where the warehouse is out in Riverside or it's even in Arizona, and we truck it all the way in, it's terrible from a congestion and environmental perspective. So it's, I think we're going to see a lot of change. Tesla's announcement of a truck has triggered a lot of reactions. So Cummins has announced an electric program. We're basically hearing from all the big truck companies. So I can tell you the powertrains, especially sub 300 miles, will clean up. What I don't know is if the logistics model is going to change. I think that probably has more to do with what policymakers want and what they're able to implement or resist versus what corporations want.
On a related note there, thinking about one part of the supply chain and what the larger vehicles are going to do, obviously our little robots aren't going to be part of that, but what they are part of is this personal delivery, a lot of it driven by e-commerce, right? A lot of it driven by takeout food. So, you know, why do we need a 4,000 pound vehicle delivering a pizza? You know, how many FedEx and UPS trucks do we want double parked making their deliveries? I'm a resident of the Mission District in San Francisco, so you know I'm seeing all this as well. And certainly, you know, 40-pound electric little robot uses a lot less energy than any of those options.
Hi, Peter. I'm Alan Sarver. I had the pleasure of attending the Autonomous Vehicles in the City symposium up at USF last week where you spoke. I was especially excited to note the time frames that you used, that really the implementation of a network of autonomous vehicles transforming transportation is happening over the next 5 to 10 years and really should be fully impactful within 10 years. These are the kind of time frames I've been using in my conversations. I've been getting sneered at a lot, but I've long believed that that is the time frame we're looking at. And we're really at a crossroads, if you will, where we need to be deciding if we're going to kind of let autonomous vehicles kind of organically be implemented as a bundle of features that encourage people to own their own autonomous vehicles and go toward a dystopian future of much more automobile traffic, or whether we really are transforming our society into a network model of shared vehicle use and driving toward a very near future where nobody has a car in their garage. And what I'm interested in is how do we really grab hold of that as the regional leaders of this, you know, this most advanced transformative environment on the planet, and make sure we're driving toward that future very aggressively?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think to follow up with you, there's two things. One, I think the timeline is going to happen, and I think secondly, it has to happen. I think it is going to happen because if you look at the players in this autonomous space, it's not just startups. It's some very well-established, very deeply funded car manufacturers and technology companies, and so it's disruptive, but it's also disruptive in the same way that like organic food was disruptive, and that it became sort of wholly embraced by the dominant players in that market. So I think that just the amount of money that's being put into it, the amount of interest, and the amount of competition between these companies means we're going to get there faster than sooner than later. And then secondly, you know, just anecdotally hearing how people talk about AV, you know, I had a little panic moment listening to my brother talk when he said, "Yeah, I love AV. It should be great. I can't wait to buy one. I'll never have to pay for parking again because my car will just circle and circle." And I thought, "Oh my God, this is exactly what we're trying to present." So even just, you know, it starts at home, but you know, to that point, I think we really do need to socialize the idea that number one, we need to be taking advantage of these, and that it's available. We should be using them, and we have to create the right incentive structures to get people. And we've already sort of created economically a structure where, you know, Lyft Line, people are willing to now share a ride with a complete stranger. Because there's security, they're safe in their brain that it's going to be okay, and then secondly that the price is right. And so we're figuring out how to incentivize that same model in an autonomous vehicle. But I think that we will get there. Again, there's just so much at stake.
The one thing I'd add to that response is, while it is very exciting that it's 5 to 10 years away, I think we have to keep in mind that from a climate perspective, we don't have that amount of time. The other thing I would suggest as a former VC is not as much happens in 5 years as you'd like, but more happens in 10 years than you expect. So AV to me feels a lot like where we were with EV about 5 years ago. So we should be very thoughtful about the unknowns, the cards we still have to turn over. It is going to happen, but precision in terms of when and how. And I think what that leads to is it is very important that we don't neglect our infrastructure. So I don't make trains, I'm not in the rail business, but when I look at something like the electrification of Caltrain or Miami-Dade looking at rail, I cringe when policy planners are putting off infrastructure because autonomous micro vehicles are going to save us. We're going to need if you just look at the urbanization that's going on, and if people do start giving up that third car, then that second, then that only car, we're going to need a lot of infrastructure. And so projects that do take a long time to implement, like adding capacity to Caltrain, we got to be full speed ahead on electrifying that and adding seats, because as this comes together, it's going to be a lot of AV and a lot of transit.
Ryan Popple, this is Tom Gage from Marconi Pacific, mostly to you. Talk about, if you would, recharging. The alternatives, I guess the ones that I'm familiar with are plug-in, battery swap out, and then electrifying the road. What's your thinking about that, and where are you now, and where do you see the future going?
Yeah, one of the neat things that's going on is that the Bolt that you saw during the Leaf presentation can plug into the same cord as an electric bus. So we're finally to the point where we have standardization on plug-in charging, and plug-in charging has gotten really powerful. We're at 50 kilowatts now. We're going up to 100 and possibly 300. So I think charging is going to be less exotic than some people have forecasted. So wireless charging may or may not happen. Through the road charging may or may not happen. Most of our customers are plugging them in at night, driving them all day. And then the synergy we're starting to see that's pretty cool is you could put in a park and ride facility where buses could recharge overnight, and autonomous vehicles, Lyft, personal electric vehicles could recharge during the day. I would say for long-haul trucking, I could see something like catenary wire systems working out. That technology works, it's expensive, but I can't wrap my head around how you could drive an electric vehicle 500 or 600 miles and then put a megawatt hour back into it in a half hour. But for the most part, we're seeing, we just implemented in Shreveport, Louisiana, 5 electric buses, 5 CCS DC chargers, and those chargers, you could plug them into a BMW i3, you could plug them into a Lyft. So it's getting fairly simple. Last thing I'll say is there's plenty of capacity at the generation level, but transmission and distribution is where we need the investment. So when we moved in Burlingame, we rapidly exceeded that little telephone pole transformer. And it was a $600,000 local investment to drop in a big transformer. So you'll see where we're going to strain the grid is T&D. That's a great question, though.
To both Ryans, from a civil perspective here in cities and counties and stuff, nobody's mentioned the costs if we were to make these investments.
So I'll take my portion of that really quickly. There's a California Air Resources Board report that would suggest that we'd save, I think it's in the billions if we electrified. So it's no longer on a total cost of ownership basis, and even in some cases on a first cost basis, electrifying heavy duty mass transit is an easy economic case to be made. I'd have to get back to you on it. I don't know that market as well.
In terms of the robot costs, exactly what do you have in mind? Just so I answer it, it's...
Well, say a pharmacy takes on one of your delivery systems. What would the cost be to the consumer or the pharmacy for delivery?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So what, and that's a very specific application where you would want a scheduled, attended, secure delivery, right? So, you know, we view that as we can't be more expensive than the alternative. Even if in the interim our cost structure is higher to provide that service. There's other situations where customers are not getting a scheduled service with a 15, 20-minute window where multiple attempts are made. You know, when I talk to the major logistics provider, if it's a, you know, must be an attended delivery, once it doesn't happen on the first try, the economics and the CO2 impact go upside down on that. If we think about things that are getting delivered in a vehicle right now, I mean, you could just inherently think that the cost of our little robot is a lot less than a Prius, right? And the more autonomous they get, the better we'll be able to drive those costs. One thing to point out, which I trimming my slides, the robots are getting better and better at driving themselves, but there's also a human remote monitoring the robot as well. So.
Hi, my name's Lori Kretschmar. Thanks, this is really interesting. Peter, my question's to you. You touched on this, but I'd love to hear you talk a little more. We're already hearing that there's more congestion on the roads because of Lyft and Uber in downtown San Francisco. So what do you say about that?
Yeah, I would argue that point. I think we would all agree that congestion is a problem in San Francisco and in a lot of other U.S. cities. Causes, I think, are actually quite myriad. We've seen the city of New York, when Mayor de Blasio asked his staff to look into it, their report, I think they were expecting, and I think some people were probably hoping, that they would find that Lyft and Uber were the cause of everything. And what they actually found was primarily the problem is construction projects that take away lanes, rerouting, delivery vehicles adding to it, more people being present in the city and personal vehicles than had been before. And so I think it's a matter of like city congestion in terms of population, and then all these other factors that kind of come together. Everyone's trying to share the road, which is a limited resource. So I think there's also we've had a team dedicated to partnering with transit agencies for as long as I've been at Lyft. And so we've realized early on that it's not a zero-sum game. There's actually a lot of progress that can be made working together. And so I give you, for example, today, my Muni trip, I've been a Muni pass holder for the 10 years that I've lived in San Francisco, and I use it all the time. It's primarily how I get to work. Today, my trip involved getting to Caltrain and taking Caltrain down to Hillsdale to catch a Lyft here. However, Muni, due to a medical emergency, did not meet my timetable, so I missed the 9 o'clock Caltrain, which means I had to come up with an alternative solution. And so I think that there's a lot of expanding like how you can get around is really important. And transit can only benefit by having this sort of like plan B, where I have confidence in transit, but I also have a backup in case something goes wrong. So to your point about congestion, I think there's also been some studies out recently that are suggesting that Lyft and Uber are pulling off of transit ridership. But in actuality, that's not really what the report said. That's what the coverage of the report said. The report was much more nuanced to say actually commuter rail and other forms are going up, and there seems to be a reduction in bus service, but we're not really sure why. And we would argue that without more information of knowing what we are replacing, not all bus service, I think most transit agencies would acknowledge, not all bus service is created equal. There's kind of like, your rapid transit core service that might be serving your commuter population, and then a whole bunch of other buses that are probably less popular but also necessary. And if we're replacing a low quality service ride, is that necessarily a bad thing? So I think it's the short answer is there's more research needed. Two, I think that if congestion is getting worse in your city, there's probably at least 6 or 7 different reasons for it.
Yeah, one thing I'd add that's important to remember is we have been in a historically low fuel price environment. What is really challenging for the transit systems, though, is during a period where crude has been $40 to $50 a barrel, car sales and vehicle miles traveled are at historic all-time highs in this country. So we are past where we were in 2008. Nothing lasts forever, and the crude oil markets are notoriously volatile. Crude's already above $60 a barrel. There's a lot of speculation that U.S. fracking isn't nearly as cost-effective as we thought it was. And with oil, we don't know. But what we do know is when fuel prices go up, the cost of moving everything goes up, and people flood back into mass transit. So for those of you who were here during the Great Recession, 101 was empty, and the transit systems were bursting at the seams. And that's right as the transit system's fuel is higher cost. So we are an undiversified system. Transit really should be a good hedge. The reality is transit has peak ridership when it has peak per mile fuel costs right now because of the way it's set up. But I would I mean, I would agree with Peter. It's good transit systems are seeing increases in ridership, and transit agencies that are driving empty metal diesel boxes in rectangles and aren't providing good service, they're losing riders to better competitive options. I like seeing a little bit of healthy competition because there are great transit agencies out there, and there are others that that could use a little encouragement to put USB ports in the buses, have Wi-Fi, do something other than a metal box with a diesel engine. And you've got to have the frequency. That's the biggest thing. Healthy transit systems, you can miss the bus and you don't even care about the bus schedule because the next one is right behind it.
Bedingley, County of San Mateo. So, I have a question. Across the bay in San Leandro, when I try to hail down a lift, it takes about 25 to 30 minutes. Of course, on this side of the bay, it takes anywhere from roughly 2 to 10 minutes. It really depends on where you're at. In San Francisco, it takes about 2 minutes. What can policymakers do to encourage more adoption of these type of technologies? Like, for example, when I look at Starship Technologies, I really see that as a great advantage for like Meals on Wheels or some other use, particularly that serves a public good.
Any policy obstacles?
So there was policy obstacles on Lyft, and then
we sort of segued. I mean, I can go first, I guess. So I don't know that there's necessarily a policy solution to it. I think we've seen that, especially in the early days, a lot of Lyft service started in sort of the downtown core areas. That's where you sort of have the density to service that. But as people sort of become more accustomed to their technology, the service areas expand. And so I think, ideally we do want to have like a 3-minute ETA for all rides, but we understand, especially for suburban areas, that may not be immediately possible. There can be, some of the policy things I guess that we could get into are more about, like I had mentioned, sort of transit agency partnerships, where you're kind of expanding out what's available to you in your area. But there's also there's supply and demand that needs to be balanced. And so supply in a lot of ways demand in a lot of ways drives the supply. So the drivers are naturally going to where there is demand. And so I think in the suburban areas, it's still a new idea that you don't drive yourself. It's sort of a new idea that there might be this other option out there available to you. So I think awareness is probably a big question to it. And use case. I think right in the suburban areas, a lot of people either are using it to connect to transit or for late night, sort of like, I want to go out drinking and I don't want to drive myself and avoid a DUI, which is a great, highly recommend doing that. It's really quite advantageous. But yeah, I think there's sort of like the supply, the demand from those areas needs to grow. And so if there's policy avenues to explore to help that, that's probably where they are.
And I know we're short on time, but just real quickly, the fun part about my job is exploring use cases, both commercial and social, for the Starship robots. And some of you in this room know that we don't go to a municipality until we've proactively gone down and sat down with them and agreed on how it's going to work within their public land. And Meals on Wheels has come up, medications has come up, water to homeless people has come up, library books has come up. So there are a lot of potential great applications. It could be very symbiotic to setting up as commercial operations alongside that.
Can I just end with one tiny policy question for you? Because this recently came up in Napa and it came up in Miami-Dade. What happens to services like Uber and Lyft, whether they're AV or not AV, in a disaster response scenario? So there are a lot of people who got up to Napa with an Uber, and when they got the call Sunday night that they needed to leave Napa, not a whole lot of supply of drivers who are willing to drive into a 35,000-acre forest fire. Same thing in Miami-Dade. So there's some tricky questions, and I think it'll be easier to solve when they're AV. You could see a policy where the government can say, okay, I need all of these. But right now, it's pretty hard to get somebody working in the gig economy to drive in the direction of a forest fire. Mm-hmm. Uber charged surge pricing when we had the typhoon. So that's probably not sustainable.
One last quick question for Ryan Popple. Ryan, you live in San Mateo County. You know that we have a lot of small school districts in San Mateo County, a lot of which are represented here today. If any of them were interested in purchasing Proterra buses, is there a minimum order size, or can somebody get like one bus?
So,
a la carte.
That's a cruel joke. Mark was at my 40th birthday this weekend, and I've been accused of taking a bus order from anyone, including Moline, Illinois, where my big sister lives. So no, there is no minimum order quantity. I actually think, in all seriousness, one of the opportunities that's on the table for school districts, and again, we don't make school buses, it's the VW funding. It's going to have as much impact as the tobacco settlement funding had on air quality. So I actually think, partner with utilities, but school districts should be talking to their elected officials. And I think California is something like 800 million. I might be wrong in that number, but California's got the largest pot of that 12 billion. School districts, I think, would be a really good place for that to deploy. And I don't make electric school buses.
Great. How about a big round for our panelists? So we're now going to bring up Kevin Mullen, who is going, along with Supervisor Slocum, talk about our Connect Award winner. Assemblymember Mullen.
Thank you very much.
My pleasure.
I wasn't aware of that.
Roseanne. So when Warren and I were discussing our vision for Connect 13 5 years ago, we both saw the need to recognize individuals and organizations that are making a difference in government through the use of technology. As we heard this morning, the technology is around us. It's what we do with it that matters. We're looking for individuals and organizations that have not only embraced technology, but have used the technology to enhance and improve how government functions and improve the lives of people we serve. How is technology allowing government to be more responsive and better address constituent needs? How have services been elevated? We're looking for vision and leadership and, equally important, results. We're looking for those that have set the standard. I think our selection of John Walton, Chief Information Officer for the County of San Mateo, fits that description, and I'll turn it over to his county colleague, Warren Slocum, to talk about our honoree.
Is John Walton still here? There he is. Okay. So John Walton, our very own Director of Information Services at San Mateo County, is no lightweight when it comes to technology. In fact, he has over 25 years of IT experience and a diverse background in both public and the private sector. In his current position as the CIO for San Mateo County, John manages a team of skilled professionals who deliver a wide variety of services, including public safety radios, data center and infrastructure, countywide enterprise cloud applications, strategic planning, and implementing open data strategies. Under John's leadership, San Mateo County implemented a countywide shared digital public safety radio system, a hyper-converged SDN data center, and connected the county's first multi-jurisdictional fiber network. John's efforts to bridge the digital divide in our county came with the launch of SMC Public Wi-Fi. Today, there are a total of 38 public Wi-Fi spots throughout the county, providing free Wi-Fi to thousands of residents who didn't have access to the internet. Just a little quick story. I was over in Pescadero recently at a well-known restaurant, Dort's there, and for some reason I had to get on the internet, and I tried, and up came the San Mateo County free Wi-Fi service, and I was able to do my research, and John was responsible, of course, for that. In his spare time, you're going to find this really interesting. In his spare time, you'll find John on the auto racing circuit with his wife and 2 young sons, joining him as members of his pit crew, cheering him onto the finish line in his Ford Mustang GT project car that he built from the ground up. So John, thank you for everything you do. Congratulations. We are very proud on behalf of the Connect 17 team to have you as our 2017 honoree. You are setting the standard for our region. So come on up, John. Congratulations. That's beautiful black box.
It's amazing.
You like black boxes,
Yeah,
right?
black boxes are great.
Yeah. So I want to show everybody the award, but I can't get this open. Can you give that a try? That's what the Director of Technology will do for you. But look, everybody, we have this beautiful Connect 17 award presented to John Walton, San Mateo County's Director of ISD, dated November 14th, 2017. John, thank you for all you do. And we need to get a picture here. Just say a couple of words, will you? We'll get a picture. Very good.
Well, I'm really humbled and flattered, to be honest. Being the CIO of a great county like this means I just get to take all the credit for all the hard work my staff do. And a lot of them are here in the audience. I want to thank them for all the work they do behind the scenes to make these things real. And having worked in government for a while, I will say it also doesn't happen without the support of the elected officials, supporting the vision, being enthusiastic about it, providing the funding to do all these projects. I am a car person, so I do love hearing about all the car things. I'm very fascinated by self-driving car technology and what it's going to do to our society. I'll tell you, I have a 13-year-old son who's already told me he doesn't want a car. He just wants a ride-sharing app and a new iPhone, so that's great. As opposed to my 8-year-old son who's already laid claim to the race car and said that's going to be his first car that he's going to drive to school. So I think there still is, many interests out there in the world of what people want. But, in our county, I think the unique thing about San Mateo County, and I just have to always put in a plug for what a great county this is and appreciate you all being here, is it really is the epicenter where we can test a lot of these technologies. We have so much support in the community to try out these ideas. I think we all see how much it has changed in the last 5 or 10 years. And being in a county that has such a diverse base of dense urban areas and very remote rural areas that people forget about, it's a great place to work with the companies you saw up here today and the towns and the school districts to really think about what is this going to be in the future for our children, for our communities, and what do we want to create. And so I think it's great to be here now with all of you thinking about where do we want to be 5 years from now, where do we want to be 10 years from now. Because listening to the panelists and having these great events every year that Assemblyman Mullen and Warren host, I think it really gives us an opportunity to step back from our day-to-day jobs and just think about where we want to be. So thank you again. I'm happy to be a small part of it, and I look forward to the future events as well.
Congratulations, John. Let's give a big round of applause for John. Right? He's been doing great things for our county for so many years, not just for the county, but for all of us here in the room. Mark and I have a few final thoughts for all of you. One, this is our 5th year of doing Connect, and we really want to stay connected with you, which is why we ask if you continue to look at the app. You're going to get a notification that has a survey. Your survey helps us when we go into the planning phase for next year. So the more that you can fill out the survey, add your comments, add your thoughts, tell us what you'd like to see next year, and allow us to send you notifications every now and then, because we like to do it based on who spoke here today, what information that they're sharing with us so that we can share with you. So it's a way for you to really help us and make this conference that much better as we plan for our 6th next year. I'm going to turn it over to Assemblymember Berman. He wants to say a few thanks, and then we're going to come back and announce our award winners for our Amazon Dots or Echoes? I always confuse them. Dot. Our Amazon Dots, which I have under here.
Thank you, Roseanne. And on behalf of Kevin, Warren, and Roseanne, we want to recognize the sponsors of Connect 17. First, Gilead Sciences for opening their doors to host the event and for their staff support and technical expertise. And in particular, we want to thank Casey Hutchinson, who you met this morning, and Maria Rangel and her staff who handled all of our facility needs. Thank you, Gilead. Second to SamSETA, the San Mateo County Economic Development Association, and Roseanne Faust. We're proud to have her as a partner, and she, Amanda Hawkins, and Christina Fernandez were instrumental with lots of behind-the-scenes support. Thank you, SamSETA.
Thanks, Amanda. There you are.
And our other event sponsors, the County of San Mateo and the Redwood City San Mateo County Chamber of Commerce. Thank you so much for your support for Connect 17. And thank you as well to Bridget Michelson and Rocky Robinson of Penn TV for recording today's events and partnering with us. We really appreciate it. And as John Walton mentioned, we're only as good as our teams. And so a big thank you to Supervisor Warren Slocum's staff, Marcy Dragon, Jim Borgart, and Bob Marks, and Assemblymember Mullen's staff, Mario Rendon, Susan Kennedy, Carol Ong, Ben Cohn, and Kevin Fong, as well as to my team, Zach Ross, Louis Maroney, and Leslie Bulbuck, for all the work that you did both before today and here, helping make sure that today works seamlessly. Thank you very much. And I'm going to turn it back over to Roseanne to announce the winners of the Amazon Dot.
So we have 2 dots, and is Amy Koo here? I believe she's here. So Amy, you won. These are for the people that engaged with the app. Thank you, Amy. And Brian Carey. Brian Carey? Brian, yay.
All right.
You're welcome. And I hope everyone got one of the little speakers, the Connect speakers. If you didn't get one, make sure you pick one up before you leave.
Even Supervisor Slocum was playing, he played DJ the other day at a meeting with those. So you can plug them, you can get them going really quickly, and they're a lot of fun. And thank you so much. We look forward to continuing the conversation and seeing you at Connect 18 next year. Thank you.